Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys?
Amen.
Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show for a third time child and foster care, religious abuse, child sexual abuse, trafficking, and satanic ritual abuse survivor and whistleblower, campaigner of historical child abuse, founder of S.A.F.E, S-A.F.E, Seek and Find Everyone Abused in Childhood, independent researcher and reporter, and someone I'm honored to call a dear friend, Dave Sharp. A little bit about Dave and what we discussed in his first two testimonial episodes he was on previously as a refresher, or if you're new here. Orphaned at birth, Dave was surrendered to the care of the Catholic Church, a sanctuary that promised safety but delivered a nightmare of unimaginable horror. For 16 harrowing years, from infancy to adolescence, Dave was not raised but trafficked across Scotland, shuffled between shadowy houses in Glasgow's underbelly, where priests, men cloaked in sanctity, presided over rituals of pure evil. Imagine a child no older than 6, locked inside a coffin in a moonlit garden. The lid slammed shut, stones rain down, each thud a mock burial, the air thick with terror as grown men laugh. This was no isolated incident for Dave. He and other children were taken to satanic sex parties, drugged and violated by multiple predators, his screams drowned in a sea of depravity. These were not random acts of cruelty, but organized atrocities embedded in a network that preyed on the most vulnerable, children like Dave, with no family, no voice, and no escape. His abusers were not strangers lurking in alleys. They were the very guardians entrusted with his care, priests, nuns, and officials hiding behind collars and titles. They targeted him because he had no one to run to. The system designed to protect him became his prison, its architects his tormentors. Dave's story rips the veil off a chilling truth. The safest place for a pedophile is the one with unlimited access to children. Yet from the ashes of this hell rose a warrior. At 16, Dave broke free, but the scars never faded. Flashback still sees him. Vivid, violent memories of coffins, altars, and blood. Other survivors find him, drawn to his courage, whispering testimonies that mirror his own. Their stories are not coincidences. They are proof of a systemic rot festering in plain sight, shielded by respectability and titles. Dave could have vanished into silence. Instead, he chose fire. For decades, he has stood as a beacon for the broken, risking his life to amplify the voiceless. He has faced gaslighting, threats, and the soul-crushing weight of a secondary abuse that comes with exposing monsters in holy robes. His body and mind bear the cost. Today, he fights on suicide watch, a man pushed to the edge by the very truth he refuses to abandon. However, Dave is no victim. He's a disciple of defiance, anchored by an unshakable faith in Jesus Christ. In his darkest hour, he declared, "I am so grateful that God has chosen me to go out and show the evil that exists in Scotland and to tell the world to put his children first." Dave is not just surviving, he is storming the gates of hell and leading an army of light behind him. Every testimony he carries, every survivor he lifts, every truth he refuses to bury is a stone in the foundation of a new world, one where no child is ever again handed to wolves in shepherd's clothing. Because of Dave, the darkness is losing its grip. Because of Dave, the voiceless are finding their roar. Because of Dave, the next generations will inherit a Scotland and a world where the innocent are shielded by warriors who once walked through fire and chose against all odds to rise. The children of tomorrow will run free, laugh loud, and sleep in peace because one orphan refused to stay silent and instead became an unbreakable force. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony to be featured in a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabouterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. I'm also streaming new episode premieres weekly on my new YouTube channel at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official. We'd love to have you come hang out. Turn on your notifications and join our loving community in the live chats every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all on the other side of the screen wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every guest on this show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, man of God, voice for the voiceless, survivor and overcomer, anti-child abuse and survivor advocate, walking miracle, and absolute warrior, the one, the only, Dave Sharp. Dave, it is so good to have you back today. Thank you for being here with us.
That's an incredible welcome. I feel like I'm walking into the arena as a wrestler, and I guess in a sense we are. We're in a battle. Yeah, exactly. We're in a battle. We're all in this battle together, and it's a fantastic entrance he gave me there. But yeah, it's battle's been on for decades. We all know that. And it's interesting, but we were talking before about one of the things we want to do, and let's get straight into this, and anybody that's going to be watching tonight, what we want to do is that we think a real pivotal moment in time, especially UK, where we're now, some of us have been campaigning for years and years and years and years, and I'm a great believer in God's timing. I believe everything that I've been through, I've been chosen, even getting put in prison on false allegations. When I went into prison, I was taken in a room by these prison officers, and there was the mental health team, there was the social workers, and there was the prison officers, and the men with the stars, the white shirts, the head men, and they were saying, "We know who you are. Everybody in Scotland knows who you are." And he says, "Really believe you." And one of the mental health team, an old lady, she says, "I follow you on Twitter, and I see all your tweets, and everything you say is true. Everything that's happened over all these years about how how we were all groomed, the children were groomed in the institutions by the Catholic Church, and how for decades and decades the whole country turned their back on it. Nobody wanted to listen because everybody threatened. And as a result of that, we've never learned how to deal with this issue. And now we're at a stage now where the prisons are full. But one of the reasons why the prisons are full is because we know that between 65 and 75% of those in Scottish prisons were sexually abused children, predominantly in the care system. And unless we find a way to break that down, unless we find a way to get these people to I was in the same position where these people spend their whole lives going through the revolving doors of addiction, crime, prison, and mental hospitals. Because when they come out of the care system, when they're being abused, as soon as anybody mentions sexual abuse, we were put straight onto prescribed medication. And many of us spent decades in and out of prisons, into crime, prison crime. And what the name of the game, Emma, was and still is and always has been, is to take the tag of child sex abuse victim survivor off us and very quickly turn us into what's called career criminals. And I'm sure you have the same thing in the States. And over many, many years, you get to see and you get to understand and you get to realise that there's a game going on here. And there's a lot of people involved that we don't believe is involved. There's a lot of prison officers, lawyers that are making a lot of money out of some of the worst things possible that could happen to our children. And more people, childhood trauma has become more profitable than drugs. People trafficking is now the #1 industry. And yet, to me, Dave, has anything changed in the 50 years since you were trafficked? I was trafficked over to Ireland and England by paedophile priests, put into these ritual abuses. And my God, it's get worse and worse and worse. Where we're at a stage now where we daren't even think that we can possibly surrender. That's not in our language. We can't do that. We have to be a voice. Every one of us has to come forward. And as I say, one of the things that you and I have been talking about is, especially now with Andrew coming out, as I said earlier on, we're now at a very, very pivotal moment where many things keep happening. And I believe in God's timing. And what we've got now, for the first time ever, we've got the royal family coming to the fore. We've got the grooming gangs coming to the fore, which we'll talk about later on. We've got the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry coming on, and now people realising the whole thing is a scam. And they just finished the English Child Abuse Inquiry, which cost £150 million, and absolutely zero's been done about it. Now the public's starting to wake up and realise, hey, maybe we should have listened to these people before. Maybe we shouldn't have turned our back on all these children when they were screaming out and telling us that these atrocities went on in these institutions. Maybe now we've got to start realising that if we don't do nothing now, this is going to affect our children and our children's children and our children's children's children. So that's why we do this, because we don't want anybody to go through what we suffered as children. And what we want to do is, I'm trying to get to the point, between us, you and I, we've spoke about how many people have come on your show from Britain, from England, Scotland and Ireland. We know there's a number of people, and certain people have mentioned the royal family, certain people have mentioned Sabo, and certain people have mentioned the Catholic Church. There's never been a better time, Emma, for us to get a group together, look for these people. Let's get in a room, let's sit down and hold a podcast or a Zoom meeting, just what we're doing now. Let's put our heads together and let's join the dots. Let's put the jigsaw together of those pieces that are missing in our lives. Because I know that so much happened to me that I'm still not aware of, either because I was drugged or because my mind was controlled. I have a space between the age of 8 and 13 where I've got eight and 12, I've got no memory. I've got absolutely no memory. And it's not until years later when I find the records that I find I'm getting trafficked. So we know so many people that have gone through this. In America, in your place where you live, I've been in some spaces where you've been on, where people talk freely about the kind of drugs that were used to drug children when they were being sexually abused 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. In Britain, we never have these kind of conversations, ever. We never have these kind of conversations. But what's happening more now, and you're the #1 advocate for this, more and more people in America are now taking an interest, suddenly realising, especially with the groomings, and especially with the royal family, thanks to the beautiful Virginia DeFrey, you know, a beautiful young girl that brought down a prince. God rest her soul, and I know we're going to meet in heaven, you know, and I'll play tennis with her, and you know, I'll play guitar with her and sing with her, and we'll have so much fun together, all of us, all God's children. We'll all get together, and we're going to live in eternal peace and happiness, you know, and we've got to learn lessons from each other. You know, I'm getting emotional because it's a journey that's very, very hard. But when you're chosen by God to do this, it's an enormous. It's not a pleasure. It's not pleasure. It's something else. It's a privilege. That's the word I was looking for.
That was so well said, Dave. I always get chills listening to you talk because you really talk from your heart in such a genuine way, you know, and I get emotional anyways talking about your story, because I just look at your history and, you know, all the weight that you carry from your childhood. And yet you're the one out there advocating for other people, and you're carrying their testimonies, and you're listening to testimonies, and you're out there on the streets, and you're in safe houses and with the homeless and with other survivors. And it's just really amazing. It's incredible what you know about your country, the solutions that you've come up with, the ways that you've figured out abuse sneaks into institutions, the connections you've made, even right down to understanding people that end up in prison. A high percentage of them are unhealed abuse survivors, you know, and it's just such a shame that you don't get listened to more, because I really feel like if you were, you could help really eradicate a lot of this, you know. And the grooming gangs, that's something that even over here in America, that became front page news. Everybody was hearing about the grooming gangs. So even though it's so unfortunate that this has been happening, you've talked about that this has been happening for a long time. It's just now making the news. And it's really good that people are starting to care about it and get emotional about it, and that it's being spread around the world so people are aware that this is happening now.
But some of the things, some of the things that people are, especially when I go in other spaces, when people hear the things like when you tell people sort of the stats what I spoke about in prison, people say you can't be serious. I'm saying that's never changed. That's never changed in 50 years. Well, how did we not know about this? Because because we were silenced. Everybody was silenced. You know, I sent you some stuff today about the person who made the false allegations against me. People in positions of power now, the system is set up to fail survivors of child sex abuse. The system is set up, the criminal justice system is set up in a way where it's so easy for these people, not only in the first place to get into positions of power, i.e. child abuse charities and various other organisations. Why? Because the object of the exercise is for the establishment and the church and the government is to silence as many people as they possible. And in order to do that, what they do is they get as many people as they can into these charities, and they pour the money into these charities. And some of these are making ridiculous amounts of money. And all we have to do is just keep them silent, keep them quiet, you know. And then when anybody starts coming out and making complaints about the treatment they're receiving, or the fact that they're only receiving one phone call every 3 months or 6 months, that if anybody starts complaining, you're out. Or if you don't take that out, you're picked on. And it's so easy for these people to make false allegations against you, then to gaslight you, and then to silence you and discredit you. And when you realise, like, some of these charities have got turnovers of dozens and dozens and dozens of members of staff that have had the same thing happen to them. And then you understand, you start to realise, and you don't have to be an academic or, you know, have degrees or anything to understand what's happening. The question you're asking yourself is, why was this charity a child abuse charity? Why were these people so desperate to criminalise and put in prison one of their own clients, who had spent 16 years in care, and they knew all this, 16 years in care, been trafficked all over Scotland and Ireland and UK, put into ritual abuses, put in coffins, hung by ropes, tied to headstones out in the wilderness, tied to white headstones, blindfolded, and then masturbated all over, and then put in coffins and left. And then what they would do is they would throw stones over the coffin to simulate burial, to simulate burial. And when you woke up, you were terrified. And these people told you when to breathe, when to sneeze, when to blink. That's why I've got no memory of any education, nothing. I don't use any big words. But this went on for so long, and so many, and not only are you asking the question, why was this charity allowed to do this? You've got to look at the bigger question. Why is the government allowing this charity to do this? That's the question. And then you start to realise this is one big organisation. This is one big... But then you say to yourself, well, hang on a minute. Surely, in the name of God, we're a small enough country. If we get enough people, good-hearted people, whistleblowers, safeguard officers, social workers, counsellors, if we can get enough good people together, surely we can do something about this. But when you try and look for them, every door's shut in your face. Every door. And then a result of that, when I went into prison, I found hundreds of Dave Sharps. So many people had been through the exact same thing as me. And these people in the prisons that work in the prison, the head man in the prison said to me, I've got to tell you something. I said, what's that, sir? He says, in here, you can't talk about child sex abuse. I said, sorry? I said, but surely, you know, I don't know anything else. That's all I've ever known. He said, let me explain, Dave. A, we haven't got the resources. A, we've been told not to. And C, if you start talking, there are going to be so many people in here because, as I say, 70% of the people in here were survivors. And I said, well, that's what I've been talking about. And he says, we know that. He said, what we're saying is, we've got your back. We'll watch you. But you've just got to play the game with us while you're here. I was only in for 30 days. And before that, they'd put me in five nights in a suicide cell. So I had this sort of metal suit on this that you can't rip. And Emma, let me tell you, now you've got to remember, when I had this allegation against me, this is Scotland I'm talking about, right? This is not North Korea, okay? I never once had an interview with the police or a lawyer, and I was never ever taken for a psychiatric report. Nothing. Given all the trauma I've had, surely to God be the first. You've got to be this guy, because isn't this how serial killers and serial rapers are molded? When something happens in adulthood and all of a sudden they turn into these Ted Bundys, and then it comes out, oh, he was abused in childhood. I honestly thought, Emma, at one point, I was waking up during the night sweating, am I going to become a serial killer? And I was making everything public. So I was emailing the doctors, the politicians, everybody, saying, listen, please don't let this happen. Please listen to me. I'm not this man that you're all painting me out to be. That somehow you're creating this, that you want to create this monster in me that doesn't exist. But it got so bad at one point, I was worried. I was genuinely worried. And when I went into prison, from the first night, the screams. Apparently there was a gang fight going on at the time in the prison, and men were throwing boiling water with sugar at each other, scolding and I would hear the screams, and it was exactly the same screams as we heard in the children's home. So after the 5 days, I got out and they put me in my own cell. And I couldn't, every time the door opened, I thought they were coming in to rape me, the prison officers. I went into this really, really dark place. So what I did is I started collecting face masks, and I started tying all the string up together, and I made a noose. And in the corner of the cell was a little bit of metal where it was a water sprinkler. And I put it on and I jumped, and it broke. And then I did it again, but this time I doubled all the string. And I did it again, and I jumped, and it broke. And I had my Bible in my hand as I was doing it, and I couldn't cope. I was saying, God, I don't have any other way out of this, because these guys are going to come in and rape me. I know it's going to happen, because at the same time, also, my 12-year-old inner child had given up. So this battle going on inside me, as well as putting on this presentation of who I am. And of course, every time when you're in prison, I mean, it's 40 years since I was in prison. So, but I still know the rules. Mental health issues doesn't get you any sympathy. It gets you in trouble. People in there who thrive on weaknesses. So, and I was very, very much aware of that. You know, I didn't have to put on an image. I've never been that kind of person either. You know, I'm never claimed to be this big I am, or, you know, I'm not that kind of person, Emma. I can only be who I am. You know, Glasgow's got a reputation of violence and hard men. And I used to see people that go out and they have this imaginary walk. and they have this imaginary chewing gum, and they want to look as hard as they can, like a gangster. And I used to think, what are you doing? I don't understand that. Why can't you just be yourself? If somebody's going to attack you, they're going to attack you. And people used to think I was mad for that, but I don't understand how to be any other way. So I had to get through that 30 days. And every time I went out to the yard for exercise, people were coming over and I was hearing all these stories. And I think, why on earth are you in prison? And then again, royal family, then again, Catholic Church, then again, SAVO, then institutional abuse, Catholic priests. And it's this big dirty washing machine that's never, ever, ever gone away. You know, and we're all trapped in it. So, as I say, you've spoke to a few British survivors. Wouldn't it be great if we could get everybody together in a space and see how, you know, I know from my experience when I was campaigning on the streets, when we went to Glasgow, Dundee, Aberdeen, Gay Pride, Walk for Suicide. What happened very, very quickly, because we went for 3 days at a time. So we'd go on the Wednesday, we'd get all the press, all the newspapers. Oh, you're going to be right. Dave Sharp's going to be in Glasgow. The next day, all the survivors would come forward, mostly. And every time we did a campaign, Emma, every single campaign we did, whichever town or city we were in, if we said we're going to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, I always got there early to set up, and guaranteed every time there'd be a whole big bunch of homeless people who had same stories, all who were abused in childhood, and then again abandoned, left, hopeless, in addiction, homeless, you know, and same story as me. And what I started realising very, very quickly is, from town to town and city to city, you started, and I was talking to someone, I said, have you noticed a pattern here? There's certain names coming up, there's certain places coming up, and there's certain times coming up. So that we knew, all of it, and I had this map in my head, and I had it, and I've still got it to this day, where I knew from Aberdeen to Glasgow, Dundee to Edinburgh, and I knew if you gave me a year, a time, and a person, I knew who was in that paedophile ring. I knew who was in it. And it was very, very obvious. And then all of a sudden, police started taking an interest in our work. And because I was saying to the police, tell us what's different now than from 20 or 30 years ago. Because a lot of people we're talking to are saying, we came forward years ago and nothing happened. So I went to the police and said, what's changed now? How can we possibly work together to encourage people to come forward? And the police went, I remember the police saying, I've never met anybody as passionate as you. I've never met anybody as sincere as you. And I said, listen, I've spent my whole life in care. I spent 25 years homeless. I've been there, I've seen all this, and I've got an amazing story I could pass on to so many people. And then they started working with us at the beginning, but then at the same time, Emma, this was my naivety. Everybody started saying, you've got to be so careful, you're so naive. And I was, because there's two worlds, Emma. There's the world of the homelessness, where everybody knows the rules. If you misbehave, you're going to get hurt. I've been stabbed 3 times. I've had an axe I've got a big hole in my head where I had an axe in my head. My nose has been broken more times than, I don't know any of the boxers' names, but you know, but so you know the rules. But when you go straight, and when you give up drugs, and when you give up crime, and when you become a Christian, and when you try and set foot into the normal world, that's where the real dangers are. Amen. Yeah, that's where, you know, when, you know, and it's so difficult. It's so difficult to fit in because we've all been social misfits and social outcasts our whole lives. And whatever effort or whatever mask we put on, whatever impression we try and give, fitting in is impossible. Fitting in is impossible because half the country are too scared to listen, and the other half are making so much money out of us that they want to silence you. So it's a no-win situation. So you've just got to keep fighting. You've got to keep getting your story out there. And again, getting back to the point, we can get these people together. I think we could open some doors. I really, really do. I think working together, we could, as I say, the Andrew thing it's had a huge impact. I mentioned the name Mountbatten. I'm surprised you hadn't heard of him. That's Prince Andrew's uncle. He was killed in the IRA in a boat off the north of Scotland. Had two young boys on the boat. One was 14, one was 12, and everybody knew he was a paedophile. Everybody knew. And Kincairn and Ireland, I know some of the survivors. I've known the survivors for years and years and years who were in there. I've been over there a few times, and but yeah, that was another one that just disappeared. The paedophile stories just disappeared. It was a massive sympathy on this member of the royal family.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and that's one of the things I think your story does really well is you are able to, through your research, through meeting other survivors, and just through your story alone, you can see where the profitability of this is. I think some people that don't understand the big picture, they think, well, why would people be doing this? Why are there so many people that, want to perpetrate children? They don't realize the business of it, that this is an extremely lucrative business, that children are extremely easily to control and to silence. They're extremely versatile with what they can do. You hear about, the different things that survivors as children were made to do as little kids, carrying out these really mature tasks that they had to do. And you see the profitability of it. There's a lot of people that benefit from all of this being hidden, from survivors like you not talking, and your story really weaves together that web. Who is making money from this? How is it all connected? And if you really dissect it, you can see how charities are involved with government, which are involved with schools, which are involved with the court systems, which are involved with the jails. And you just see this big web of people working together to keep what makes them money in the dark. And they do it by penalizing survivors. Why are we locking up these survivors without treating them and getting them therapy and help if we know that they're sexual abuse survivors? Well, they don't want them to get better, of course. They want them to have felonies, to not be able to get a job, to not be able to talk, to not have credibility, to not be able to travel, and to basically just discredit themselves. So it's an advantage to people who benefit from the business of this to have survivors homeless and in jail, addicted to drugs, alone, silenced. And so your story really does, it illustrates that. And it's amazing that you've been able to talk to so many people about this and to sort of bring these different groups together that have been affected by this to try to get out a bigger message to people, that it's not just one person doing this. It's not, these random acts of violence. This is an organized crime syndicate working together that is profiting off the backs of children and survivors who are being silenced and not listened to.
When you think about it, when you start to do research and analyze the profits that are made from children in care, and I'll talk about the kitchen. I think I did this on your last show, but for those of who are listening who don't know about the history of child sex abuse in throughout the UK, and not just in Scotland, but for over 100 years, the children's homes were overrun by the church mainly. 90+% of people who were abused in care were abused by the Catholic Church, and that went on for decades. And as I said earlier, while we were being abused, our families and our communities were being threatened into silence. Now, I told you the story the last time about the little boy in the bed next to me. Do you remember? Joe was being abused. Sometimes I would pray that the boy in the bed next to me would get picked instead of me to be abused when the parties were on and when everybody, during school term, when it was quiet. And sometimes Joe would get picked and sometimes he wouldn't. And as I said before, what happened is Joe disappeared off the earth. And these priests took me downstairs to the cellar, to the shower area, and they blindfolded me, and they put a rope around my neck, and they tied my arms behind my back. And it was at that point I heard all these other men coming in, and they started to belt me, and then they raped me. And this priest, this main one, Ryan, he said to me, if you ever tell anyone what happened here, you're going to be murdered, just like your mate Joe. Now, I was 12 years of age. So as you can imagine, this affected every single relationship I had. Now, when you fast forward 40 years, because it took me that long to find all these other men, I knew there was men out there. Occasionally I'd bump into people, but I knew for years, I knew this wasn't just happening to me. Even though every time I tried to speak, I would get put in prison, I would get put in a mental hospital, and they'd stick the ligator up my backside, and oh, it was horrible. But I knew, and I campaign, and then eventually I went to the press, and I told them about this murder, and a whole load of men came forward. And my point is about the silence, and bear with me in my point. What happened is that when the reporter, when the news reporter phoned me up the next day, and he says, Dave, we've had dozens of men who have come forward to verify that they went through the exact same thing as you. He said, but there's this one call, you need to take this call. I said, yeah, okay. As I keep saying, Emma, I'm very much an open book. I don't have any skeletons. I don't have anything that I'm hiding or making up or exaggerating. Yes, we all lie. And again, it's very important to say that which happens to everybody is, and I'll maybe talk about this later. There's many times when people will fill you full of, I don't swear, but I'll B-U-L. There's many times where people will try and put you off and fill your head full of nonsense. I'll use that word, nonsense, instead of the bad word. That happens a lot. And so you're like this, your head's in a spin. But anyway, this man said to me, Dave, you've got it all wrong. I said, what do you mean? He says, Joe wasn't murdered. He says, Joe committed suicide on home leave because he was trying to tell his mother what was happening, and she wouldn't believe him. Now, this was very, very typical because so many families refused to take responsibility and to own up because they all knew. Everybody knew it was happening, but because because the Catholic Church was feared by everyone, they got away with it so much. So what happened then is, talking about the child sex abuse in UK and in Scotland, in the early 70s, well, in those days, when you became 16, this is when you were automatically released, regardless of what we didn't commit. We were the orphans. So I'm in Nazareth House, run by the nuns, the Catholic Church, from age of my mother died just after I was born, up to 8. And then from the age of 8 to 12, I was in another Nazareth House. And then the age of 12, what happened in those days, everybody automatically got transferred into these young offenders prisons. So that's where we were. It was most of the boys in there. Some of them were murderers. Some of them had committed awful crimes, but we were just transferred into there. Now, what would happen is that, as I say, I forgot. I'm talking about the history. Yeah. So when you were 16 years of age, that was when if you were caught shoplifting a pencil or a piece of chewing gum, whatever you did, you had to stay there until, even at age 12, 13, 14, you stayed there till your 16th birthday, right? So what started happening is in the early 70s, everybody started pouring out of these places. And what happened is that anybody, regardless of anybody who started talking about child sex abuse, you were immediately referred to your GP and you were put straight onto prescribed medication. The majority of those who were too scared to speak out turned to illegal medication. In other words, everybody became drug addicts because they had to silence us because there was so many of us. Because if you look at it in a financial term, which we can talk about from 2013, when we started talking about the child abuse inquiry and any any occurring redress scheme, when you start thinking, hang on a minute, 50 years these people have all been in these homes and nobody did anything. There's thousands of them. If we even give them an inch of a redress scheme, this is going to bankrupt this country. When you think of that, then you start thinking of why the prisons are so full, Emma. You dig? You dig what I'm saying? Yeah? You get the picture? So the object of the exercise over many decades is to silence as many people as possible. So when we started coming out, this is when homelessness exploded. This is when addiction exploded. This is when suicides exploded. You know, and nothing's changed. Since then, nothing's changed. And what happens is then we've this infancies when they come out and have their own children. These children grow up in these dysfunctional families and they also can't cope. So then they end up on drugs and then they end up in domestic abuse relationships. So what we're doing is we're creating this factory of perpetuating. I was going to call it birdseed for the black crows, because I think if you get my understanding, we're just feeding these paedophiles. How from the early 70s we were all putting out the prison system, and we were the care homes, and anybody who spoke about being sexually abused, they were automatically put straight to the GP, put on medication, and then into a life of crime and addiction in prison. And then most people spend their whole life going through these revolving doors, and then in between sentences, when they have their own children, these children grow up in the same environments, and they too end up in dysfunctional surroundings. They can't cope, so they're put in the system, and then they're sexually abused. And then when they leave at 16, they've got no education, they've got no ambitions, they've got nothing to look forward to, and then they just become the same again. And again, we're just producing these. It's just to even think, I struggle that we just keep feeding these paedophiles and these evil people. It just, you may as well just, it's Nazism. You can't find the words. I got myself in trouble, right? Are you aware of the drug consumption rooms?
No.
Right. In Scotland, they just introduced a drug consumption room, right? It's open now. There's a lot of controversy about these drug consumption rooms. Now, a lot of people had a lot of suggestions. That's theirs. I don't need to mention any examples. I'm not interested in any other examples. One of the things I said, which got me in a lot of trouble, and I think you'll understand this, right? I've been saying this for a long time. Most of the people who were sexually abused, who went through these horrific abuses, and there's a lot of them, most of these people spend their whole life, as I say, going through these revolving doors. What they're doing is they're waiting, looking for that one chance, that one opportunity where they can find that one person or that one safe place where they can open up old wounds and talk about the wounds buried deep, about the kind of stuff that we're talking about, satanic abuse. But they've got to find the right place to do it, Emma, because they've tried family, they've tried it in the friends, they've tried it in the local football club, they've tried it and they can't get it out. Nobody wants to hear. So they're trapped in this. So I said, if you have the drug consumption rooms, if you use that opportunity and you made sure there was people there or leaflets there where we could guide these people, specifically child sex abuse survivors, to somewhere where they can at least see a light at the end of the tunnel, I think you'll have the drug deaths. You know, the drug deaths in Scotland are one of the worst in Europe, yeah? I said, I strongly believe if you do that, you will cut the drug deaths in half. But if you don't, you may as well put these men in the gas chamber because you're giving up their last hope.
And what is the drug consumption room? What are those?
It's where people who are drug addicts can go and use needles safely.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And under professional supervision. It's turned out to be, some call it a success, some say it's not a success. But what I'm saying is that most of these people, not most, we know that a large amount, if you look how many of the people in prison population, how many drug addicts and stuff, but you know, and when I said this, people were saying to me, you speak the truth so much. And other people were saying, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. How dare you say that? And I said, well, listen, I'm telling you this because if we don't take this opportunity to save at least one life, why are you saying it's evil? How can you say it's evil when you know, we all know, and you're like the person that's saying this, you know what I'm talking about is the truth. Everybody knows this truth, that the stats are there. This is the truth. You cannot keep locking us up. You cannot keep silencing us and putting us in prison, because at some point you're going to run out of spaces. But again, and that's where they are now. They're releasing people from prison. And many child abuse charities are saying, listen, give us the money that you won't give us more money, let us train more staff, and then we can take these people out of prison and direct them into a normal way of life to give these people some hope of family unity, family reconciliation, and make them, you know, worthy citizens. But no, they're the scum of the earth. Nobody wants to know. I'm an example, 66 years of age, and they throw me in prison. How's that possible?
One of the things that you mentioned was the generational cycle of all of this. And I think a large majority of people in society think that abuse is purely random, that there isn't a sort of a side effect of it, and that survivors who go through abuse, they experience it, and then once they grow up, it's over and they're fine. And they don't understand the ramifications of what extreme abuse can do to a child. And I mean, on some ends, it can turn them into a saint like you, somebody who doesn't want to hurt even a fly and who spends the whole rest of their life trying to help people. But for a lot of people on the other end, it can mean the opposite, that they internalize what they're not able to share, and it becomes rage and anger, and they end up perpetuating the cycle onto either themselves through drug addiction, through self-harm, through homelessness, through self-sabotage, and or they perpetuate it on the children that they have, or the people in their life, or their family, you know. And so you see these side effects there. It's like a hamster wheel, you know. Unless somebody does have a safe space to share, to heal, to help, to get help, to feel heard, to experience love and compassion, and to have safety, that they're locked in that perpetual PTSD trauma cycle, you know. And I think that's brilliant what you suggested, to put options for people where these addicts may be, you know, at these centers that you're talking about. If they know that maybe they can get help, maybe they'll put down that needle and call the number that's on the brochure, or see the therapist, or join the community of survivors that's being offered, you know. And that's horrible that some people weren't on board with that, because it makes perfect sense. Addiction is typically a side effect of something. It's not a choice that healthy, happy people make. That's something that people that are hurting do to escape their pain most of the time. And I think that's really brilliant. I really hope that they let you do that, you know, because I think that could be a really, really good option for some people.
I'm not listening to it. No, I'm not listening to it. I'm totally irrelevant. My voice is worthless. I'm every bad thing that's connected with trauma. You have to understand, trauma in Scotland is a crime, you know, because these people are making the kind of money they're making. But when you carry trauma, that's the biggest weapon for these people, you know. He was sexually abused. He's telling everybody he was called. He's telling everybody he was into these ritual abuses, and then his wife died, and he was pregnant. So if all these things happened, why we can't believe him? anything he says, because he's too traumatized. So another way of saying is, we know it happened, but we don't want to do anything about it. You know,
Totally.
this is the problem. And the thing is that with the justice system, when these people in positions of power, and again, we're not just talking about judges and whatever, you know, it goes in lawyers, it goes all the way through the system. You know, it's as soon as somebody comes forward with and this is why so many end up in prison. When somebody comes forward talking about being sexually abused, when somebody comes forward about the most horrible things that happened, you know, when they're talking about satanic ritual abuse, it's the fear of God in people. Of course it does. Of course it does. And you're trying to get people to understand that we get what you're saying. We get why you react like this. It's common sense. It's the human mind can't cope with it, and we understand that. But rather than criminalize us, walk away. Don't, you know, you don't have to use. See, the problem, especially in the UK, Emma, is especially when men are seen to be not able to deal with something, they'll take that something and turn it around and make them the bad person. That's called machoism. Is it machismo? You know, well, you know, if a woman marks me, I'm going to give her a slap. You with me? You know, it's this. I am man. I am he. And if anybody wants to challenge me, you know, whether it's a fight or intellectually, you know, it's the feminism come up. But when it's sex abuse, especially satanic ritual abuse, you've got to be careful. Being a survivor is it's a jungle, and I'm sure it's no different. I speak to people like Casey Sunshine, who's a friend of yours. I speak to many people in America who experience the same things. It's the world.
Yeah,
and nobody knows that more than you, because you've got all the stories.
And that's the horrifying thing. This isn't just one area of the world that this is contained to, that we can be like, oh my gosh, that's so sad that this part of the world is going through that. How can we all come together and change it? You know, you realize that this is happening in every single country, every single state, every single city, every single community, you know, every institution. And it's horrifying how widespread this is. It's eye-opening. It's life-changing to learn it. But that's the missing link. You know, these networks don't want us to know how widespread it is. They want us to think that there's a lone Jeffrey Epstein and he's the only one, but oh, we took care of it, so look the other way, he's all gone, you know, and never share who he was connected to so people can see a bigger picture. They want these lone pedophiles that get thrown to the fire. They take care of them somehow, and then society looks away and just thinks, gosh, that's a horrible person. I can't believe that they did that. You know, they were psycho or whatever it is. Where in fact, this is so broad and this spans the entire world. This spans all different demographics, all different cultures, all different socioeconomic classes, all different ages, genders, everything. You know, there's no category or stereotype that fits an abuser. You know, it's all different types of people. I mean, you mentioned lawyers, you mentioned people that work in the court, police officers. You know, I've heard all of that testified. It's unbelievable how high functioning these people are and the positions of power that they're able to hold, and the professionalism and the high functionality that they're able to maintain during the day. And then at night, the things that they do are just absolutely psychopathic and horrific, you know, and it's so hard for people to understand that duality, that evil can be cloaked in something like a robe, that somebody that preaches in the church and is supposed to protect children is actually at night going and abusing them and then leading a church sermon the next day. You know, that's so hard for people to conceptualize that. But that's exactly how it is. You know, evil doesn't try to be seen in the light. as what it is. It comes in the light as light. It shows up with a smile. It says all the right things, you know, and it's connected to all the other darkness that's hidden behind the veil of light, you know, and it's really horrific. It's scary how common it is. And then it's not just that it's common, but it's that the same types of abuses are being talked about all over. You hear about, from your testimony, you know, I narrated it a little bit in the intro, being locked up in a coffin. You know, you think, oh my God, somebody went through that. But you talk to somebody in Australia and they went through the same exact thing. You talk to somebody in America and they went through the same exact thing with their abusers. So you see these abuses, even the things that they do to children are exactly the same all over, you know? And so that to me is where it brings in the validation and the proof, because you can call one person crazy, but can you call 50 or 100 or 200 people crazy? They all have the same exact memories of things that happened to them. You know, I think at some point we need to really wake up to the reality of this, you know, and come together. Like you said, we need people in society to step up, to want to change this. We can't keep depending on the same institutions that are abusing children to be the ones to fix it. We need to look away from the government, look away from the school systems, the churches, the courts, and we need to come together as a group in society, as survivors and as non-survivors. And we need to be a united front for this and to demand change ourselves, you know. And I'm not sure how you feel about that. I'm sure that you feel exactly the same, but it's really frustrating how people just sit on their couch and they're like, oh, well, the government's going to do something about it. I don't have to do anything. And it's really, the people are where the change is going to be at.
Everything you're saying is absolutely true. I mean, I probably know over 50 survivors in Australia. I've got a wide, have you heard S.A.F.E? S-N-A-P? Can you hear me?
I haven't heard that.
Have you heard of S.A.F.E?
No.
Abused by priests. And there's ECA, End Clergy Abuse. These are various charities, child abuse charities, that are just the clergy abuse. And every time I get emails from, not every day, but on a regular basis, and get testimonies as well. And it's just what you're saying, Emma. It's just what you're saying. When you talk about being put in a coffin and go, oh, don't be silly. And then you see that you know that, and I know this has been going on all over the world, Australia, America. Now, when I went to the newspapers, when I first went to the newspapers, we didn't mention anything about coffins. We were focusing on Joe, how he hung himself, and how the priests could be so evil as to be head that he'd been murdered. Now, about a week later, I live in England, yeah. I live in England. I don't live in Scotland, as you know. But about a week after it came out in the newspapers, I suddenly got a phone call. Got two phone calls, and my phone went, and it was the reporter that covered the story, and he says, "Dave, I've received a phone call, and this guy wants to talk to you, and I think you should talk to him." I said, "Yes, that's okay. That's fine." So, and he says, "Dave, I wasn't in the same home as you at the same. I was in another home run by the same people." And he said, "I was put in a coffin in roughly the same year as I was, and we shared the experience. And then about a week later, I got another phone call from somebody in Aberdeen. So I couldn't make this. You can't make this, you know." And again, he'd contacted the newspaper. So this is all evidenced. This is all, and everything you've said, and you know, it's all evidenced. But we just can't get the right people to come in and say, right, let's take this. Let's deal with this now. It's not happening. And even now, Emma, I told you this on the last space, but as recently as a year ago, I remember I received a phone call from a man, and he says, "Dave, my name is so-and-so. Do you remember?" Again, no, I don't know, you know. He said, "I too was in the same home as you." And he says, "Dave, I'm getting flashbacks." He said, "I don't want to go to my doctors. I keep getting flashbacks. And I'm in the woods. and I'm being hung by a rope. And he said, I'm not sure if you're in it. He says, but I know that you've been through similar things. So I was able to ask him certain questions, like, were you in the care system? Were you an orphan? Did you have parents? And very, very quickly, just with a couple of questions, you can see that he's the same MO as myself. So we know the kind of people that were targeted. And then I was able to, and again, Emma, I'm not an expert, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I'm none of these things. I'm just an ordinary guy. I didn't even have any O-levels. You know, the only reason I've survived so far is because of these good looks and stuff. But that's a joke. But this guy says to me, take a picture. And I said, can I stop a minute? I said, I can tell you what happened next. I can tell you where you are or where you were, but are you prepared to deal with it? He said, I'm fine. He said, I'm a grown man now. He said, I'm in my 60s. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to. And he started explaining about what I said earlier on about being in the woods. And then he said I was being tied up and blindfolded. And then I said to him, I said, did they masturbate over you? And he said, yeah. And then he said, you were there, weren't you? You were there. Not at the same time as him, but he understands that I went through the same thing. So we're on the same page. You know what I'm saying? We're on the same page. So that gives so much relief and understanding. And then I said, when you went back into the castle, this big powerful place, did you go have a big meal? Yes. And I said, well, let's describe the table and the view outside the big window. And he said, I can do that. And he started getting excited. And he realized that what he was thinking and dreaming and thinking about did exist. It did happen. But this has been trapped in this guy's mind trapped in this man's mind for the best part of 50 years. You know, and then he described the table, a big, really big, long wooden table with lots of wood chairs, and then this huge big window, Emma, that looked out to the lake. You know, these scenic, photographic, tourist pictures you see advertising the beauty of Scotland and its lakes and its forests. And that's where they took us. That's where we used to get taken. And here was this guy 50 years later, describing his experiences, and it's all come. And this guy who I'll talk to you later about, who wants to come onto your show, an English guy who went through the exact same experiences. And I was talking to him this morning. He does a couple of podcasts, and I was talking about coming to you, and he's very, very keen to come on your show. So we'll talk about that when we go off air. Yeah, you got this guy. He's an Anglican priest, but he was abused by the Church of England, and amazing. I've known him for 10 years. I've known this man for 10 years, and I only found out last week he lives in the next village to me. He lives 4 miles away.
No way. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we're meeting next week for dinner.
Oh, it's magical when survivors can come together,
Yeah.
you know, because you guys are not only bound through and can bond through your experiences, but through the healing too, to have somebody to talk to that can understand and to have that validation. And I can't even imagine the amount of healing that must have given those men who reached out to you saying, oh my gosh, I'm having these dreams or these flashbacks. I don't know what it is. Why am I picturing gravestones in a cemetery and a castle? You know, that had to have just been so healing for them to know that what they were experiencing internally in their mind was real, that it was validated, that they weren't having these crazy, you know, delusions, that they weren't making it up. You know, that had to have been really healing. It's really sad the amount of people, like you said, that just, they don't get listened to. Society doesn't want to hear it. Even therapists can't even stomach some of this stuff. Therapists get traumatized through listening to these stories, which is just crazy, if you ask me. Like, some of the, churches aren't safe for many survivors. Most of them aren't. It's really rare to find a church that is trauma informed and that's not corrupted somehow. So it's really sad that there's not safe places, but that's why it's important that survivors come together, because you guys can be a safe place for one another and help validate each other's stories and understand the pain that you've went through, and also get puzzle pieces from each other. That's incredible that even for you, you've met so many people that had your same experience to make it that more real for you, that what you're saying to yourself and that what you're advocating for can be validated through these other testimonies of men who have been to the same places, had the same abusers, were involved with the same networks and the same locations, and I'm sure that there's just so much healing taking place through what you do, Dave. It's really important what you're doing. You're truly a hero in your country. And, I pray that the whole world hears your voice. I feel like you are a big puzzle piece for a lot of these traumatized and suffering people in your country and beyond, that just, they have nowhere to go. They're being silenced. And there you are with an open heart, an open mind, open arms, and you're able to help validate and connect them with other survivors to help get them involved with rallies that you're doing and community work. And it's so healing what's taking place with what you're doing, and at the same time, it's so sad how the establishments in your country are so corrupted as a whole at the top that it's really hard to penetrate and get any help through the people that can help, that it's like it just reaches a certain level at the survivor level, but it's hard to penetrate through that veil that they've really put on thick over society.
People more, it was all buried. It was all covered up. I know for a fact that in 2011, when Sabo died, there was this huge rush across the UK. Police forces, not special people, police forces in their thousands were told to go over all the victim stories, all the survivors, and silence them. Do whatever it takes, silent. And not just myself, we all started getting strange phone calls from people say, we heard you said this, and what they did is what's the gullible meathead syndrome. So they want to try and turn everybody against each other. Yeah. Again, this is a normal story. You've heard all this before. But what they do is they want to pit all the survivors and campaigners against each other. Now, people didn't believe us. But then what we say now is, if you didn't believe us, then surely to God, you must believe these hundreds of young girls who have had the same thing happen to them by the grooming gangs. You must understand that we talk about child abuse, how you, the people, turned their back on us and didn't listen to us. Now you're doing exactly the same with all these young girls. What's the difference as far as your ability and your humanity to do something for your children? So you all, when we say everybody's to blame, it's, and again, I go back to the very beginning. When I heard this last night, I think I said this off air earlier on, right? When we heard about Andrew, I was watching a political program, Question Time it's called. It's on once a week. And the lady who runs the program, she stopped the show and she says, breaking news, I've got breaking news. Prince Andrew has been stripped of all his titles. He's getting kicked out of his house. And it was like, and the whole audience clapped. And everybody went, yes, all cheered. And I suddenly thought, and I say early on, there was an interview last week with a young lady, who's one of the grooming gang victims. And she was doing a press conference with a politician. And she answered a question, and then somebody interrupted her. And she shouted back, she said, you all called us liars for years. And at that moment, I said, that's what we've all been saying for years. That's what we've all been saying for decades. That young girl spoke for everybody, historical, present and future, just like Dufresne did as well. You know, these are the moments that drive people. These are the moments that bring more people forward. These are the moments where people suddenly stand up and realise, like we're talking about, to get people to listen, Emma, you know, and believe us. These are the moments when a girl's 17 or 18, I'm not quite sure, maybe a bit older, but when she stood up with such bravery and such courage, she wasn't just talking to the news people in that room, she was talking to the whole country. You all called us liars for years. Thousands of them, and thousands of survivors of historical child abuse as well. And we've now got this fight where everybody wants to do what they can to help, but they haven't. You can have all the resources, but if you've not got the real desire to listen, understand, and have ideas on how to change, if you're not prepared to listen to the survivors and the victims, you're only going to make things worse.
You bring up so many good points about why it's important to speak out and why so many survivors need to, you know, that we need more people, if they're able to come speak out and to have a voice in this and to come together. And that's amazing that that young girl had such courage to do that in front of all those people on TV. You know, I'm sure so many survivors watched that and just felt so validated and happy that somebody was speaking for them. You know, but on the other end, there's a dark side to speaking out. And you've talked about this on your social media, and there was an article written about it with what happened in Ireland and the people that did come forward courageously. You know, there was a disappearance of some of the whistleblowers that came forward to talk about what happened. And I wanted you to share that aspect of it too, and to talk about that part of the story, you know, because they are, as many people that are speaking out, there also historically has been so many times where they've tried to silence any group of people coming forward, you know, and it makes people shut up and not want to talk whenever they see people being harmed. And that's a deliberate action to make survivors go back into trauma and to say, oh my God, I'm not going to go out and speak. I'm too scared, you know, and it's really sad. So I want to just honor some of those people too that didn't make it through their own speaking out and the courage that they had.
I can give you a number of examples of people who have gone to the police to speak, and I'm thinking of one right now, and they went in for 6 hours, and this person had 2 children and 2 grandchildren. They went in and spoke to the police for 6 hours, came out, went home and hung himself. Oh. Because they couldn't believe what they were getting, what the answers they were getting. Now, when you talk about whistleblowers, you know, if you look at the situation now in the UK with these the illegal immigrants, and we're now practically averaging 1 rape a day. I don't know how much you've been keeping up to date with what's going on in Britain right now, Emma, but we've kind of reached a stage where we're all 1 rape a day. Dave Shut 59 a video ago, and I put a load of banners in my back garden. Scotland, stop and listen to your women and your children. Or sorry, Scotland, don't turn your back on your women and children. And I did another banner, Survivors United, we will never go away. And the third one was Whistleblowers United. And I did a video with the Scotland music, and it's really, really lovely. You need to listen to it. I don't know if you have listened to it. But the message what I was sending was, can you imagine if we, and not imagine, more of a case is what we need to be doing, what we've got to do, we need to go into these communities, and we need to get the women and girls united, and we need to form our own movements within these communities where we can create and appoint whistleblowers and train and educate safeguarding officers. Because here's the thing, Emma, I'm getting so upset because I'm hearing messages. I'm regularly now getting messages from women and girls who are saying, Dave, I'm too scared to leave my bedroom. I'm too scared to get into the town or into the city because I'm scared I might get raped. Can you give me any advice? And I'm saying, hang on a minute, I live in England. And these women are in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and there's nowhere to turn. There's nowhere to turn, and the government's doing nothing about it. So if we were to create an environment, there's no protection. And I had this idea. I said, there was a situation in Glasgow, right? Picture the scene, right? There was this building that was owned by the Catholic Church. It was used as offices or something. Now, right next door, still part of that building, but right next door is a big school playground, and it's a primary school. Right next door, and the Catholic Church have just sold this building to a foreign group to turn it into a hotel for migrants. And everybody's going, what? Now, I had the suggestion. I said, can you imagine if we went up there as a group, we did our own collection, we got as much money as we can from a collection, and we say to these women, right, and what we can do is planning, right, I want to go to a second-hand shop, and I'm going to buy a settee, a couch, a three-seater settee, a table, some table and chairs, a kitchen, and a lamp, a long lamp, a light, and put it outside the office, this building. Now, there's gates around the building and metal fencing around the building. And what we do is we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little tartan ribbons, and we tie the tartan ribbons onto the gate, and we sit there for as long as it takes, and we send a message to everybody. This is our community. This is our town. This is our area, and we're not giving it away. And we've got these women, whistleblowers. If anybody is experiencing any distress, any men, anything that's happening, you've got your whistleblowers here who, if you need to go to the police, these people will go with you so that we know there's no hiding. What's happening now, Emma, is there's so many cases that are not even reaching the newspapers. It's getting really, really terrifying. So it's come to the stage now where anybody who's a whistleblower, we get people who have lost their houses, have lost their jobs, because they wanted to come forward as a whistleblower. Whistleblowing is one of the most dangerous jobs now in Britain, in Scotland. And let me share something with you a minute. If you can get the picture back up, I just wanted to share this with you. What we have now, Emma, is there's a number of groups starting up. Some of these people are ex-councillors who have lost their jobs. Some of them are just concerned citizens. Some of them are not members of a political party, but they're affiliated with certain political parties. And what we're trying to, I've been in meetings with these people, and we're trying to get certain petitions put into the Scottish Government where we can change the rules for whistleblowers and safeguarders. And this is one of the petitions I'm working with, and it's brief petition PE 1979, whistleblowing and safeguarding. The tragic human cost of child safeguarding failures is incalculable. Just one open question to all the Scottish MPs. What can you do to ensure that victims and whistleblowers are given a voice to help in safeguarding failures and prevent these human tragedies? So this is one of the petitions that's currently going through the Scottish Parliament, which I'm kind of supporting. I wouldn't say I'm involved in it, that's an exaggeration, but the women, the people that are doing this have, they've come to me, asked for my advice and shared my story. And again, this is one thing that we need the whole country to come together. Okay, right. Again, this is one of the things that it's a case where we have these people in positions of power We have these people got money. We have these people have got the experience, but it's getting them to marry up with us. We're the victims. We're the survivors. We're the whistleblowers. We're the campaigners. And in my case, I carry this stigma that now I'm a criminal. So some people say, "Oh, I don't want to work with Dave Sharp. He's a criminal." That's fine. You know, I know I'm not. And these people who I'm talking about here, they also know I'm not. And what's most important, Emma, is what happened to me is the example of why you need to be doing this. Is you need to be listening to what happened to me more, because you can't, as I keep saying, at some point Scotland has to realise you can't keep putting people in prison just for having their voices set. You can't keep doing it. You've got to stop sometime, you know, and face the reality. And again, when this current SNP government, if and when they go, and the next person comes in, whether it's Labour or whoever it is, I don't do politics, I'm not interested. At some point, somebody's going to have to look at the books and see this mess that you know, that so many people, why are all these people in prison? Why are so many people losing their job? But more importantly, why are all these people so scared to come forward? Why have we had so many cover-ups within the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry? Why do you do that to Dave Sharp and all those other people, innocent people? All that rather than sit and listen to them? Really? This isn't North Korea, but this is the reality. And again, it's just by the power of God and my faith and my love of God. I go to bed every night and I say, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for making me who I am. Thank you for using me and the power of my story." And then, as I told you before, every morning I wake up, I've got a little sign beside my bed, an A4 in a frame, and it says, "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs your support the way you support me." And then I get up and I go in the kitchen and I pour coffee into the kettle, into the cup, and I go to the fridge to get the milk, and on the fridge door I've got a sign that says, "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs your support the way you support me." And then I drink my coffee and I go into my bedroom and I look and I remember all those years I was homeless and in addiction, and open the wardrobe and I've got all these clothes I can choose from, you know, and I've got no debt. I've got this beautiful flat. And then I go out and as I get to my front door, just beside the door, I've got a sign that says, "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs support the way that you support me." Now, as I go out that door, Emma, nothing in my past is important other than my experiences, which is all positive because it got me to where I am now. So I go out with that attitude that the next person I see, I'm going to tell my story to. And I end up in all these places you wouldn't believe. It's amazing what happens, you know. Again, it's been punctured, if that's the right word. It's been slightly punctured by, I do have trouble trusting people now after what happened with the child abuse charity. You know, I depended on these people so much because in 2015 onwards, we started seeing a lot of deaths, you know, or a lot of survivors, because then, thanks to people like myself and others, more stories were coming out, more stories of abuse. So more people were coming forward. But at the same time, Emma, a lot of the drug rehabilitation centres, all the rehab centres were shutting down and being turned into posh offices and whatever. And addicts had less places to go. We suddenly started seeing a rise. And where I'm sitting now, right, if I point over here, I've got a big book cabinet. And I had every time I found a death, whether it was suicide or a drug overdose, I would have a candle with the person's name on it. And at the beginning of 2015, that went up to 29. And it was, I had a breakdown. And I ended up in a mental hospital for 10 days. And then I had to go on a programme for nearly a year with other survivors. And again, as you know, everybody in the world knows, from then on, the drug deaths just went higher and higher and higher and higher. And even now, all over the world, people talk about the drug deaths in Scotland, but no one wants to talk about the underlying issues. And when we talk, people say, you know what, Dave, I never even thought of that. And I said, but you know that 75% of the people in prison were sexually abused as children. Most of them went on to be drug addicts. So why can't you join the dots?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really sad. We're like so disconnected from abuse. Our society is like so disconnected from the prevalence of abuse that we overlook things like homelessness and drug addiction, and we victimize these people, blame them, shame them, treat them inhumanely, and there's no connection that these are survivors. These are people suffering deeply that didn't have a chance to heal, that didn't experience a loving home or somebody to listen to them, and that's the side effect of what they went through. I hear it over and over again just on my podcast. The amount of guests that I've interviewed that were homeless for whether it was a day or years of their life, like what you experienced, is staggering. The amount of abuse survivors that end up homeless, and of course, a big part of that also is a lot of, abuse survivors, the people. It's not this stranger danger abuse where it's a stranger that they can walk away from whenever they're an adult. A lot of times it's the people closest to them. It was their families. It was their caretakers. It was the people that raised them, like what happened to you, people that they trusted in school, leaders in their life. It was people that surrounded them, and they have to abandon that in order to find safety and healing. And with that comes, not just the devastation of losing the people in your life, but a lot of times loss of resources, loss of a home, loss of your whole livelihood and everything you ever knew, which can just be so devastating, but it's amazing to me how we just lack that ability to connect those dots in society. And the way that we treat these people is just so horrific. Same thing with people in prison. Most people in prison shouldn't be there. It's crazy that we're not getting them help, that we just lock people up for being traumatized and having extreme PTSD for something that they suffered from and never got to heal from.
I remember when I was in prison and I was in a meeting with the two mental health officers, two women, and it was a very, very, very small room, just a desk and sort of crammed together. And I'd been to a number of meetings with them, so they were asking me. They were more interested in my campaign and what I knew, and they were. But I remember, I never forget this. One of the older women, and she says to me, she says, what kills me is I have to go home at night time, knowing that most of the men I spoke to today are in here over and over and over again, and we're not allowed to help them deal. And I said to myself, spoke about the national conversation and getting certain people in the room, remember? That's one of the people we need to be in that national conversation. These prison officers, some of them are genuine, and a lot of them are genuine, and they're with us. And then as you can, I'm looking at, I was looking at some, I was thinking as you were talking there about America, and I'm thinking about all these black areas where it's just the deprivation and just nothing, and how it's the exact same in any place in the world. That it's the most deprived, the most abused, and most, and it's just, it's sad. People will make money out of tragedies and stuff. I don't get that. I got a phone call once in Scotland, right? They started doing these conferences on childhood trauma, and I went to the first one, and there was like 4,000 or 5,000 people there, and they're charging like £100 a head. And somebody was saying to me, there was stories going about that people were saying, they talk about childhood trauma, but they won't talk about child sex abuse. And I thought, so I knew people that were, and people who work with homeless people on the streets, and I met them, I contacted them, and they said, oh, we're going to this as well. I said, it's going to be really interesting, because I don't know what, how you can do this. How can you talk about childhood trauma and not talk about child sex abuse? And they did for 8, and they had Gabor Mate. You heard of Gabor Mate?
Mm-mm.
Have you heard of Gabor Mate?
No.
Can you hear it? He's a famous, he's a psychologist. He writes a lot of books and stuff, and I've got a few of his books there. He talks a lot about childhood trauma, and he actually sex abuse. He was the only one that did, but he was the main attraction. But afterwards, I met with a load of people, and a lot of street workers, and some of them were saying to me, Dave, we came here hoping that we could learn something about how to treat and deal with people like when you were homeless. And we're so disappointed. And I said, what we've just witnessed today has set back the child abuse movement 25 years. Because everybody's now going to know, hey, I can go to college, learn about childhood trauma, and I don't have to talk and listen and hear about all the stories of child sex abuse. This is going to be great. Do you see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden, child sex abuse became put in the bin. So what happened is, some of us started speaking out about this. Now, I had met one or two of the people, the organisers, and all of a sudden, I got this phone call from this man. And he said, listen to me carefully. You need to stop talking about child sex abuse and making people feeling guilty. I said, excuse me? What? Say that again? He said, you need to stop it. Just stop it, all the nonsense about child sex abuse. Nobody wants to hear these stories. And I said, who do you think? What are you talking about? I said, I'm going to report you to your boss. In fact, I'm going to go to the police. And he said, listen to me carefully. He says, be very careful who you talk to, because I know people in high places. And I was just shocked. This is somebody high up, a prominent person within the conference movement, who actually worked with children as well, believe it or not. And I said, I'm going to the police. I've got to go to the police with this. This is incredible. So I went to the police. He said, I'll leave it with us. And they phoned me back the next day and says, we can't do nothing about it. Not enough evidence. But I've got it on email. It's all written down. And everybody knows that one day I'm going to get my day in court. And these people that have all done these things to me, they're going to be accountable. They are going to be accountable, because it's all written, it's all on evidence. What the things I sent you earlier on about the charity, the Wellbeing Scotland, these things I sent you, they're all boxed, and there's no way, it's impossible for me not to win the case. But the problem is, in Scotland, being a child abuse survivor, a child sex, we come under the category where we're not eligible for what do you call it? What's the word? When you get legal aid, aid, we're not eligible. So if we get in any trouble, we're not eligible for legal aid. So I've either got to find a mountain of money, or I even started doing the lottery, because sorry God, I wasn't giving up faith in you, but to see if I get the money. And the first thing I would do is I would take these people to court. And here's the thing, I you know this, but from before, Emma, I learned and I managed to forgive the people who abused me in childhood. I managed to forgive the Catholic Church, and I speak a lot about forgiveness. But what these people did to me now, this time, this is a different kind of evil. This is something new. It's nothing to do with the far right or the far left. This is an evilness where this is what we're talking about. The word is power. You know, everybody, whether you're a window cleaner or whether you're a clergyman, everybody wants to climb up the ladder now. Everybody's looking for that next step of power, and they don't care who they push away on the journey, you know. And it's very hard to, it is really, honestly, very hard to meet decent, kind-hearted people now.
Yeah, 100%, you know, and it's amazing that despite knowing what you know and all the obstacles that you've incurred, that you just keep going, that you keep showing up every day, you know. And it's really beautiful to hear those reminders that you have around your home, and all the people that reach out to you to share their testimonies or to say that you had an impact. And, you know, equally, it's really sad that more action isn't being done, even though there's awareness of this in the churches, in these care systems, in the jails, on the streets. You know, there really is an epidemic happening of this, you know, these side effects of child abuse, but no talk about child sexual abuse attached to it, just homelessness and addiction, you know, and these different side effect conditions of abuse. You know, so the work that you're doing really is important, Dave, you know, and it's really sad too on the ends that you were talking about, that there's no whistleblower protection, there's no legal aid, there's not even acknowledgement and compensation for the crimes that you and others survived. You know, military people that go in the military and end up leaving on disability because they were part of, you know, they were a victim of war, they're compensated their whole life. They're given tons of benefits. They're given facilities that they can go to for medical care and counseling. They're given compensation every month. We honor them as a society for their sacrifices, for what they did. Where children like you fought in war that you never signed up for, you never consented to, and you were a prisoner and a victim of war that you had no weapons to fight against, you had no voice to speak against. And you grow up as adults, and not only is your abuse denied, you're called a conspiracy theorist, or you're called that you're lying, or that it's too sensational, people can't listen to it. You're not given any money for help with therapy or with recovery if addiction or suicide or something is part of that path of the side effects. And you're not given any type of, like you said, legal aid if there is trouble that is incurred, if you're caught with drugs or shoplifting, whatever it is, you know, any small crime that many of these people end up doing, you know, or some type of violence. It's really sad that we don't only ignore these crimes. It's the only type of crime on earth that we don't acknowledge. We ask you for proof. Where's your proof that you went through this as a child? We don't say that to any other victim. If somebody comes out of the military, or if somebody, you know, was robbed on the street, we don't say, give me your proof. We offer them compassion and we try to help them, you know. And so it's really horrible that not only is this so prevalent, 70% of people in prisons went through this, probably the same with addicts and homeless people, probably the same percent. You know, it's one of the, like you said, it's the biggest crime that is taking place on the earth. It's the biggest profitable crime on top of that. And we don't even acknowledge as a society that it happened. And it's horrible, you know, and it's even sad with these grooming gangs that you were talking about earlier, that they're sensationalized. It made news all over the world, but I haven't heard anything about it ever since that boom happened. It's like it's just being buried again and moved on, and something else is up in the news. And, you know, these poor victims are still struggling. They're still not being helped, you know, victims like you aren't, you know, and it's just, what a mess that we're in, and how horrible that we've allowed this to happen for so many generations, that we're depending on the same people that are causing these crimes and profiting from it to stop it and fix it. You know, it's just this like really backwards irony that we live in, and it's really horrible, and it's what makes your work just so vitally important, you know. And I love that there's a community that you've established, and, you know, I really hope that this can eventually lead to something where we can get that acknowledgement and help for survivors that they deserve, and even, you know, access to things like therapy and medical help for all the internal trauma, and also all, you know, the bodily trauma that you end up incurring through being abused as such a small child. You know, so many survivors deal with tons of health issues as adults after what they went through. And I know you have too, in a lot of ways. So it's really important that you're advocating for what you are, you know, and I'm sure It's really appreciated by people. And hopefully, this message, not just on this podcast, but through any messaging that you're giving, can encourage more people to come forward in your country who aren't survivors, who can help advocate and stand by you. And also to give survivors courage to come step up and join a community that can be there for them and for them to use their voices, because we really do, now's that time. We really have to push this now and try to get this acknowledgement so survivors can have more help than they've had. It's just absolutely horrific how we've treated them. A survivor that Chris O'Leary, who's here in America, he calls it the abuse of the abused. You finally get free of your childhood trauma, and now you're abused by society and authorities and all these different institutions, churches, and we really have to stop that. We need a trauma-informed society. We need people to care. We need help for survivors, and we need protection for them. If we want people to come forward and say names, that's what everybody wants. Say the names, come forward, come share. Well, how are we going to protect these people who are naming these prominent figures in society, all the way up to the royal family and to, the PMs of your country, presidents of my country? We need to give these people some type of protection. And it's horrific that so many don't, and that so many lives have been lost because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's about greed. It's about power. And again, the word love, compassion, that's all gone. And again, that's what I was talking about today with Chris, the fellow who I introduced you. And we are saying as well that with what's happened with Andrew now, a lot of people are saying, and we keep hearing this over and over and over again, you ain't heard nothing yet, or the worst is still to come. We keep hearing this, and we keep believing it, and I'll never stop believing it. And that's why, again, getting what we were saying earlier on about trying to get people together. I'm keen to work with you. I'm very keen to again, I know for a fact, I know, I've already been told on Twitter I've been shadow banned. I don't know what that means. I've never heard of it. I don't know what it means, but recently when I'm sending tweets, nobody's getting them. Even if I send it to one to you, I get no response. So, but when I look in it's there, but apparently I've been banned. So I don't know why. I don't know who I've upset. I'm having an impact somewhere. I don't think I've offended any individual on a personal level. I don't think I would do that. Obviously, people will block me because, especially in Scotland, if you put a Union Jack up, you offend the nationalists. And if you put an Irish flag up, you offend the Unionists, where even though your tweet might be about peace and unity, people just see a flag and then assume that you're the other. So it's very, very hard to keep people focused on what we're trying to achieve. So again, and what I'm going to be doing now is focusing on this, because I really believe that something's happening. I'll get back to this, Emma. I think there's a reason why all this is happening now. And again, I go back to Proverbs 28, which I've been studying for the best part of 30 years. There's things in there that I read and I don't quite understand, but I know that I've got to keep reading it. And I've met lots of different pastors and ministers and scholars, and give me your interpretation of Proverbs 28. And my, I'm not very good at reciting because my memory's gone, and I'm 66 now. My body's knackered, my brain's knackered, and I get that. And I think Proverbs 28 to me talks about the meek, the weakest, those that are the less privileged. These are the ones that are going to take over the world eventually. It's something that people who are struggling, people who are giving their life to Christ, regardless of what's happened to them, these are the kind of people that it's going to come out. And I firmly, strongly believe that no matter what this world throws at us, we have to stay prepared. I dare to afford myself. When I became retired there, I started drinking a bit. But again, I've got an addictive personality. I've been an addict of one sort my whole life. you know, and I say I've got an addictive personality, and I find it difficult to find the balance between sitting back with your feet up and having a drink, and then very suddenly you go to thinking about drink all the time, and then I say to myself, step back, because you have to be ready. And I think we all have to be ready, because when God calls us, he'll only call us if he thinks we're ready. And I want to be ready, and I want everybody else to be ready, you know. And when we see what's happening in the world today, you know, one of my biggest fears, Emma, is that, and I've seen it a couple of times, especially when I was in London. I was in London when the Pope died. I took my banners down to the cathedral in London, and across the road at the subway, it was like Washington, and there was just these all on fentanyl. They were all just dead. And then within the space of 2 minutes, 3 minutes, this is a wee bit later, within the space of 3 minutes, I saw two women have their phones snatched off them as they were sitting on, you know, having a coffee at a table. And the whole world became what's happening, you know, this. And I seen a couple of fights, and I thought, if I've got all this strength and belief and faith, what am I going to do when it comes to being called? What is being called? You know, you talk about the wrath of God and a righteous. What do we do when, you know, if two people if there's 5 people attacking 2 people with swords? What do we do? Do we stand there and say, you know, let's pray, or do we stop it? You know, there's something is changing. And we have to be ready for that change. And again, the priority has to be to put our children first. We could never lose, because that's what God said to me when I became a Christian. Go out and tell the world to put my children first, because he knew that my childhood had been stolen. And I've got a story, and I've also got a plan, and I've got ideas, and I've got demands. And it's the way you change your language, and you've got to be so careful, because as soon as we start making demands, they'll cut your tongue out, and they'll cut your hands off, and they'll throw you in prison. And we wouldn't use that language, you and I. We wouldn't have used that kind of language a couple of years ago. But again, you've got to get ready, because, you know, when we talk about the armour of God, you know, we're talking Richard the Lionheart here. We need to be ready with the suit. I mean, I'm actually thinking of hiring this suit, you know, for when I go to church, you know, just to get me there safe, because the world's so crazy. But again, and again, I told you the story already. I told you the story when I was in London. I'd been to a conference or something, and I was coming out of a subway, and I got caught in the flood of people. And all of a sudden I looked round, and this young girl was sitting there, and caught my eye. And she was very dirty looking, really dirty blonde hair, and her eyes were dead, and her clothes looked soaking wet, and I caught her eye like that, and I had to get to her, and I'm swimming with these people and pushing them aside, and I got within inches of her, and all of a sudden this man and woman came over in a split second. You pay. And I thought, oh my God, what on earth is happening here? This is London. You pay. And I'm looking around for a steward or, you know, police, anybody, but I get caught in the crowd, gone. And I look at things like that, Emma, and I think, was that a sign? Is that something I've got to learn from this? You know, this can't be the norm. You can't tell me this is the norm, where people can just dump children on the underground train station to prostituted out. Are we really saying that's what's happening? I'm getting really emotional, because again, we have to find the strength. I'm not saying love me, I'm great. I'm the only one doing this. There's thousands of us. There is a lot of good people out there, but we have to somehow keep having our voices heard and get stronger and more united. Because here's the thing as well, when you talk about anger and carrying all this baggage, when I talk about forgiveness, when I get to the gates of heaven, and I will get to the gates of heaven, and when St. Peter says to me, "Big bunch, invite you to dinner tonight," I don't want to be going in there carrying all this hatred and anger and fear and everything that I've had to carry throughout this life. I don't want these heavy burdens that have been thrown on us, all these accusations and all these labels that are stuck on us when we've just tried to fit in, to live the best life that Christ chose for us, even though what we suffered as childhood. So I want to make sure when I get to the gates of heaven, I might be a bit overweight, but I'm ready. I'm ready and prepared to say, because the one question we're all going to get asked the same question: did you put my children first?
Amen. And you'll have no trouble answering a resounding yes to that. And a lot of people sadly won't be able to say the same whenever they're put in that position. So it's, again, your work is so important. And one of the things a theme that we've been talking about is that we need to get people to come together, and I wanted to just kind of pick your brain, see if you could offer advice to people on how you've organized rallies and events, and maybe some guidance or tools that you could give other people to maybe encourage them to do the same thing wherever they live in America or Australia or even the UK in a different part than you do. How have you been successful getting people together and creating this? And how have you gotten in touch with the media? And, what are some of the things that have worked for you doing that?
When I started campaigning, I won some compensation. And as I was part of this charity, and I say to the charity, I want to go in the streets, I want to go campaigning, I want to look for survivors, encourage more people to come forward. And other survivors in the group, and they said, and I said, listen, the biggest and only weapon and the only thing you need is your story. That's all we need, our story. We're survivors, we're here now. We're blessed, we're gifted, and we've got a story. And 2 or 3 people were saying, oh no. And then others were saying, what a great idea, what a fantastic idea. Now, let me give you another example. Let me tell you what I used to do, right? When I used to go to Edinburgh, right? This is when the referendum was on, the referendum in 2014, where Scotland had to decide to know whether to be an independent country or not. And the whole country was divided. And outside the Scottish Parliament, there was people with knives and swords and shields and swearing, and the arguments, the debates were going on, and it went on for over a year, and just everybody got involved. And so I decided nobody's talking about the children. So what I did was I got a 16-foot banner, and I said, forget the referendum, look after your children first. Now, what I did is I had no money, and I lived in England. So when I used to go and do the campaigns on my own, I used to stand outside the Parliament and come up and talk to me, share their stories. And quite often people would say, I'd love to do what you're doing. This is amazing. And I said, well, do it. Stand with me. Stand. And then slowly, more people. And I said, just share your story and say, you can come forward. We can have a national inquiry. We can force the government to come forward and start speaking to us. And this and that. What used to happen is, I had no money, right? So I used to hitch up to Edinburgh. Now, in Edinburgh, you've probably seen this, you're probably aware, you've got it in Australia and lots of other countries. The city centre's full of backpacker hostels, yeah? Right? So it's full of backpacker hostels. Now, what I found was, when you get into these hostels, Emma, most of them are like £10, £20 for a night. But I wanted to go up and do 5 days and 5 nights. I didn't want to go up just for one day. I want, every time I do a campaign, it's either 3 days or 5 days, or in some cases 10 days, when I stood outside the Catholic Church. the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. I stood outside there 12 days. So what I did was, I found out, when you go to these backpacker hostels, right, they have a room. Every one of these places have a room. It's either in the basement or it's in the attic. And this room is full of homeless people. Now, these are homeless people that come in, they do all the laundry, they do all the cooking, they do all the cleaning, and they get a free bed for it. And I said to these people, have you got a spare bed in it's called long stay? That's what they call it. These rooms are called long stay rooms, right? Because they're homeless people, so they get to stay there for a long period of time. Where, as I say, they do all the manual labour, the cooking, the cleaning, and they get a free bed. And I said, can I get a bed? Have you got any spare? Oh, she said, yeah, we've got some spare beds in the long stay, because usually it's like 6 or 7 bunk beds. So there's always more beds than there is people. And I said, I'll pay a couple of £2 a night. So I used to get the long stay room for 5 days for a tenner, for £10. So I've won a bargain. So what I would do is I would go into these rooms and they smelled. They were all drug addicts. They were all homeless. They were all on heroin. They were all alcoholics. And they'd all been in and out of prison, and they were all the same people I'd lived with for the last 25 years when I was homeless. And what we used to do is, at night time, when they did all the work, the shifts, in the evening, what they would do is, they would take out the smoke alarm. So they would take the smoke alarm out the window, and they would all sit in a wee circle, and they would drink, and they would get out the small gas bottles, and put the heroin in and fix up the heroin. So I didn't do drugs, and I still do. I've never done drugs in 30 years, but I would get a case of lager, a case of beer, or a bottle of vodka, and we'd sit in a circle and we'd all share stories. So it would give me a chance to tell these guys my story about how I became homeless and how I managed to turn my life around with Jesus Christ. And then they would sit and listen. And then in the morning, when I got up, now listen back. So when I got up, and what I used to do is, because I knew that I could get robbed, so I only had one bag. So I'd have the bag and I'd padlock it to me. I'd have a chain around my arm, and I'd sleep with the bag because I wasn't taking any chances. But what I would do is, when I woke up in the morning, I would sit up with it and made sure everybody heard me, and I would say, "Dear God, help me to find someone today that needs your support the way that you support me." And all of a sudden, these guys would look round and go, "Dave, that sounds really nice. And your story last night really touched me. And I'm also a survivor. Maybe I can share my story with you." I went, "Yeah, that'd be great." And I would say, "What are you doing today?" "Well, I'm not doing anything. I'm not working. I'm on the night shift, or I'm doing something else." "Why don't you come over with me and stand with me at campaigning?" "Can I? Do you mind?" I said, "No, come with us." So he would come with us, and I had like 1,000 leaflets. I got all these leaflets done of advertising and sharing stories and things. So, and I'd stand there and hand these out to these thousands of people that were all standing outside the Scottish Parliament debating. And people would come over, either some would have the Scotland flag, some would have the British flag, and they'd screaming and shouting at each other. And then somebody would come over and say, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I say, "My name's Dave Sharp. I'm a survivor of historical child sex abuse. We're here because we're trying to raise awareness of child abuse in Scotland, and we're asking you as people to help us to get the government to do a national inquiry into child sex abuse." And then the people would say, "I'm a survivor as well." "Well, listen, why don't you come and join us and sit with us, and you can share your story." By the end of the week, we had like over 50 people. And every night when I went back to the room, and over the whole week, I got all the testimonies of all the other guys who all had the same story. Everybody had the same story, and it's wherever you go, everywhere. wherever you go. You know, it's a story in Scotland, not so much true today, but because there's a high immigration, but almost everybody knows somebody who was sexually abused, because it's that prolific, it's that huge. So no matter where you go, you've got to be prepared. And I used to use this opportunity. So these people who, you know, and I'd say, listen, I'll buy you lunch. You know, let's go, before we go, let's go and have breakfast. You know, because you could go down the stairs, get a breakfast for £1 and stuff. So these were my new best friends. And these people became campaigners themselves. Is your story. My testimony of how God turned my life around really is a story of two people. There's Dave Sharp, who was full of anger and hatred, who was in and out of prison, trapped in addiction, got in fights, you know, got drunk and got himself in trouble. And then when I became a Christian, God said to me, here's the deal. You do things my way. Give up the drugs, give up the crime. You turn your life around and you go out and tell them to put my children first. I will make sure you get everything you ever wanted. Not needed, but wanted. Now, I'd been homeless for the best part of 25 years. Within a year, I'm in a flat, and I didn't realise why the way things were happening. See, when I was homeless, I used to have friends. I used to buy friendship. I used to always buy friendship. If I was in the pub and I seen a guy or groups of people, we've got to be ready, because again, it's getting back to Proverbs 28. God's army is going to come from those who have least. You know, those who are biggest have the biggest weapon. You know, I really believe that, and yeah, it's. And I still do it now. I love going out and being homeless. Even although I've got this lovely flat, I love going out, especially in Northampton and London, but not so much London now. But again, when I go down to London, Emma, I go to places like Cricklewood or Camden. These are places where I was homeless. We had our own family. We were all children. I was 16, 17. Some of the young girls and boys turned up there were barely 15. If people who are listening don't actually believe what I'm saying, I did a tweet recently, because almost every year I go down to London almost every year, and sometimes I take my guitar, or sometimes I just take my headphone and I do a vigil to remember all those children whose lives were taken or lost because of child abuse on the streets, Scottish people. And I have a big Scotland flag, and I do a table, and I find places where what we used to do is what we call Barefoot Town. We had a thing that was called Barefoot Town. Barefoot Town was when you found a safe place. It could be in a derelict building, it could be behind a church. It's where you felt safe from strangers and perpetrators and paedophiles. When we found a safe place, we would all take our shoes off so that we could touch the earth. It's a bit hippie-ish, but we could feel free and we didn't feel scared. And then we would start playing guitar and playing the Beatles songs. So we'd play the Beatles and all dance and sing. And that was our harmonising, that was our home party moments that we spend. And now what I do now is I quite often go down to the church in Camden, and I'm doing one soon. I'm doing another vigil soon, and sit there with my headphones on, and I play the Beatles songs, and I can hear my brothers and sisters, and I can smell my brothers and sisters, and I can feel them, and I sit there and I wonder how many made it through like me. I wonder how many are still homeless or are still sex workers, because so many of these young girls, we know for a fact right now in Scotland, over 50% of all the sex workers now in Scotland were sexually abused as children, and predominantly again in the care system. So again, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. We're not crossing any bridges. We're all swimming in a drown. I say, when I go to London, this is where I can reminisce and go back to where it all began. You know, it's emotional. It's really emotional. But again, it's this amazing story. It's the most incredible story, you know, of recovery and forgiveness. You know, and as I say, there's two lives.
Yes, that's really just incredible how boots on the ground you are, and that the things that people usually shame and walk away from, like drug addicts, homeless people, you know, society puts those people underneath them and looks at them like they're less than human and treats them as less than human. Where you go and try to understand them, and you sit and have a conversation with them, and you become part of their group, you know. And I know that you were homeless, so you can relate on such a deep level. But I think it's just amazing that even though you have a beautiful home now, you have more safety, you have more resources, you know, and you have a roof and a bed to sleep on at night, you know, that you still go out in the street and you're out there with them as much as possible, you know, and you're still learning the stories and gaining statistics and insights on why these things happen and what types of people are out there, you know. And you just have such a beautiful heart that you're able to do these things, and that you still continue to do them and have no shame doing it like other people do. You know, I really hope that those things rub off on people. There was times when I lived in Las Vegas, there was homeless people everywhere. And I remember you couldn't avoid it if you were walking. And I would ask a lot of people, you know, what's your story? How did you end up here? And in those times that I did, I always heard an abuse story. And it's just really heartbreaking what these people go through and how they're treated. And I remember one person said, because I asked what their name was, and they said, "Oh my gosh, you're the first person in years to ask me what my name is." And I remember I just almost started crying, thinking, "Oh my gosh, nobody's called you by your name. You've just been like treated like an animal, almost like worse than an animal, you know." And people just look at you like you're less than human, that you're not even worth knowing what your name is. And you know, it's wonderful, and that you've given these people a profound hope. You've brought them into a circle where they can advocate for themselves and have people advocating for them. They can join people that went through something that they did and get together with a group and bring awareness to other people in your communities that don't know that this is happening. And I think that would be amazing if people listening to this podcast right now thought about ways that they could go do that, you know, and looked at the demographics right in their own communities that would fit these statistics, people that are addicted to drugs, people that are homeless, you know, sex workers. You know, there's people right in our own communities that would love to probably have a voice and to be heard and to join in a rally or to advocate for themselves, you know. And you did it in a way that didn't cost you a ton of money. It costed you your time, but it was time that you were happy to give because you were able to share your story, and vice versa. You know, you were able to get to let people be heard and to give them hope. You know, but this is something easy that anybody could do. We can all do this whenever we get a moment to think about who can we ask about their story or get to know or advocate for or give somebody hope. It's those little things that can change somebody's life. And so many times we're put in positions where we can do something like that and we're too good for it. Oh, I can't talk to that homeless person. They're homeless. You know, I'm not going to give them my money or my time. And of course, there's danger. There can be danger doing some of these things too, of course. But at the same time, to just completely dehumanize these big populations of people is abandoning abuse victims and survivors and trauma victims that don't know how to cope with what they went through. And this is what they are doing, you know. And if we can advocate for them, if we can target those demographics in our communities like you have, you know, we could probably turn their lives around, even if they just get to tell their story to somebody that can change their life, you know. And I just want to honor you for that. I'm so touched listening to your heart, you know, and to the things that you've done and how you just continue to do it. You walk into fires that people run out of, you know. You go in and you sit with the suffering, and you sit with the poor and the struggling. And, you know, those are things that most people look away from, you know. And it's wonderful that you've been able to get 50 or more people together just from listening to somebody's story. I mean, how amazing is that you were able to create like a whole rally around that, you know, and to get these people to get excited to go advocate for themselves. It's just really cool.
Yeah. People, as I say, I live in a small village in Northamptonshire. My next door neighbour are sheep and cows. You know, it's I get one bus go by every hour. You know, God's put me in a beautiful place to rest and be ready for what He's got planned in my life next. And quite often I can't resist the urge to jump on the train and go somewhere, anywhere. Birmingham. I like. I haven't done it for a while now, but I used to like going out with the street preachers. I'm sure you got them in America. I used to like contacting the street preachers, and I would tell them a story, and I would say, "Would you mind if I come out with you if you're in Bournemouth or somewhere?" And I said, "Would you mind over and come out with you tonight and just sort of see what you do and see what the current trends are and how many people are out, how many young ones, how many old ones, all kinds of things." And quite often I go out, and the one thing I've got is that when you talk about lived experiences and how everybody talks about, we must connect with those with lived experiences, but when we are asked that question again and again, has anything really changed? And when you speak in a spirit of love and unity and compassion and not in a condescending way, but to be, listen, you know, that nothing has changed, and we have to work harder, and we have to stay for these people, because I know their parents, not personally, but I know, and you can basically see the people. It's like, again, a lot of people have problems differentiating a beggar and a homeless person. You know, it takes a second. Just look in the eyes, you can see someone who's in desperate. And with the teachers, as opposed to a lot of the street workers, you know, 80% of the street preachers are kind-hearted people. You know, they're men and women of God, and it's great to watch them at work and see the work they do. But again, you go and you see what hasn't changed, and you know that nothing's changed, but you still have to maintain that you're talking about, Emma. You know, and you have to override the injustices. You have to override the obvious rejection, the obvious rejection that these people have suffered their whole lives, because I've seen it myself. And again, it's just so sad that to the majority of the people, I'm a threat rather than someone to use. But that's the way it is now, you know. But we keep sharing stories, we keep raising our voices, you know, and it's much thanks to you as well, because again, I don't. I've told you already. I don't watch your videos because I have to live with the darkness of satanic ritual abuse. It's and again, it's when you see people, you know straight away that someone that's suffering and someone that's hiding things and someone who hasn't dealt with their issues. And there's a lot of good people that are doing bad things, not intentionally, but because they're finding ways to deal with the issues that are buried deep, you know. And again, I learn from you, and I learn. But again, and what happened when you talk about satanic ritual abuse, I remember when I went to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, and that was the one place where I was able to talk about it. What happened is the next day, the paper said, we were taking the satanic abuse parties. I'm not joking. It wasn't hundreds. It was dozens and dozens and dozens of emails and things from Satanists. How dare you call us the same as the Catholic Church? We're not as bad as the Catholic Church. And I was so confused. I couldn't understand. But it was hundreds of them these people were attacking me. And again, the biggest beef they had was that they're not as bad as the Catholic Church. And that really, really confused me, because the people who, when I was taken to Ireland, and when we were taken to these parties where the walls were all red, the light was red, and they were pouring red wine over us, they were making us drink wine, and they were throwing straw cherries at us and doing all this strange stuff, they were priests. They weren't Satanists, whatever they are. So I don't know. And this is where I look to people like you to answer the questions, because I don't know. Because I don't read on it. I very seldom ask questions about it. And it's a place, when you talk about mind control, this is what I talk about, and I learned this from you as well, in another podcast that you were on, an American one, that when because I spent 16 years in the care system, and when I was as young as 7 and 8 and 9, certain things happened that I didn't understand at the time, but this was part of the mind control, where we'll call them little scary things, but it's not till years later you suddenly realise that I was picked out, and they had my whole life destined. They had my whole life worked out. Knew time I became 16 and went out to the outside world that my head would be so messed up that nobody would believe a single word I was saying. And I'm sure you've heard that story so many times.
Oh yeah. And then of course there's people who don't understand how a child copes with trauma by burying the trauma. And so then you get people that say, well, why did you wait so long to tell? Why didn't you tell then whenever it was happening? Or why did you wait till you're an adult or a teenager? You know, and there's such a lack of trauma-informed educational people that are residing in society, you know, and they don't understand that, like, first of all, why would a child who's being perpetrated by everybody in their life, even if you could have spoken out, who would have listened to you as a child? People don't even listen to you as an adult. You know, they're starting to now, but just in general, there's adults all over the world, millions of them, who are speaking out about being abused, and nobody believes them. Why would you believe a small child? You know, so there's that aspect, but there's also the burying of memories, like how you have missing time from 8 to 12 years old. Most survivors bury their trauma. It's compartmentalized. It's buried. They dissociated through it, you know, just to survive. And so those memories don't come back until you're safe, until you're in an environment where you can actually process what happened to you, and you don't have perpetrators around you, or you're not in fight or flight 24 hours a day. You can actually breathe and let those memories flow through you and let those parts of you speak. You know, you talked about the 12-year-old self that you have inside. You know, I'm sure that part of you too didn't talk about what happened and didn't feel comfortable coming out until there was safety to do so, or until there was an environment that was conducive for that. And so just the fact that we have, you know, this type of society that doesn't embrace these types of stories, again, it's crime. You know, we listen to crime every other way except whenever it comes to abuse, and we gaslight it, and there's just the way that we treat survivors is just horrible, you know. But there's also so many people like you out there educating and getting people together and helping them and bringing groups together. There's therapists that I hear from all the time who are now listening to stories like yours to understand what their clients went through, instead of just saying, satanic ritual abuse, I don't believe you, I'm firing you. They're like, wait, what is this? I keep hearing it. I need to learn how to help these people. And so it gives me a lot of hope, you know, whenever I get people that reach out that are curious enough to dive in, to not fear it, and to lean into it, and to say, wow, there's people going through this. Gosh, this is dark, and it's going to be hard for me to listen to this stuff, but I'm going to, because I didn't have to live it. The least I can do is learn about it, so I can maybe help somebody through it who went through it, you know? So there is a lot of good developments happening, where I think people that traditionally wrote this off as being fake, or they didn't want to hear it, they're starting to become more open to it. But there's just still so much work that needs to be done. And we need more people that are boots on the ground like you out there helping victims and survivors, identifying who victims and survivors even are in our communities, getting them together, helping to get resources for them and compensation and help and treatment, and validation for them to have that safety for their stories to be heard. So they're not reacting out of trauma and turning to drugs and turning to, prostitution and these horrible habits. And they can actually be safe enough to be able to process what they went through in a way like you have. And I know it's still a struggle. It doesn't ever just stop. It's not something you just are magically healed from. It's a lifelong journey, but you look at somebody like you and it's like, gosh, if somebody were to meet you on the street randomly, they'd never guess that you're a childhood survivor of these heinous things that you went through. You're so delightful and you're so kind and compassionate. You have such a big heart. You're joyful. You're funny. People would never guess your past and what you went through. And I wish we could get more people to that point. Again, it doesn't mean you're 100% healed. That doesn't just happen, but to get somebody to where they can live a functional life and they're not always turning to drugs and they're not always homeless. That would just be such a huge thing in service that we could do for these people.
Yeah, I think since I was put in prison on the false allegations, I do stick out a bit. Obviously I've got real trust issues at the moment, Emma, and I find myself, and again, it's not any different in the sense that when the pandemic came along, for example, everybody started finding out, suddenly isolated, becoming medicated, and all of a sudden everybody lost contact with their families and people lost their jobs, and we were saying, hey, welcome to our world. We've lived this life for and one of the most prominent speakers of mental health was Ruby Wax, and she spoke a lot about this, about what so many people suffered with during the pandemic is what many of us have gone through our whole life. And I have been on my own my whole life. I don't know if I told you the story, but I just recently contacted my family, contacted just recently, and we had a weekend together. And again, but I'm really struggling because we've never bonded. We've never. A few times I went to Scotland and I met my family again, but it's too difficult for me. It's just it's too much pressure and stuff. But we left on terms this time, and I'm hopeful things are going to go. But I wanted to talk to you, go back a bit. I wanted to talk to you about I would love to meet a therapist. I would love to meet these therapists, and how somebody could explain to me why and how I lost those 3 years from the age of 8 to 12. Nobody's ever sat me down and explained that. And also, when you talk about the drugs that we were given, now I've never known. I've asked so many people and so much investigation. I find anything here that tells you about what drugs were used. Obviously there were sedatives and things like that. Because I remember when they used to take me out my room, when this head man, this Ryan guy, this is the grooming process, right? This was my grooming process. When this guy took me out of my bed and he took me into his room, then I don't remember anything else until I'm waking up in his arms and I'm naked. And he kisses me and he's kissing me, and he realizes 100% that I've never experienced this in my life. I never had parental closeness. I never had that parental connection, or any brothers. I never had any of that, and he knew this, and then this went on for a while, and the spaces are blank. So I know I'm almost 100% sure that this is the time when the grooming was happening, because what suddenly happened is, for some reason, for whatever happened, it suddenly became extremely violent, to the point where we would have this big belt out and I would be kneeling down. Sometimes I would be hand tied behind my back, but he would be whipping me and beating me and then raping me. And it's trying to understand what happened from the cuddling and the love and this kind of stuff, to then all of a sudden you're taken downstairs. You know, one of the ones was that we went down. You got to remember, this is a 16th century castle. There's no such thing as central heating. You know, this building's hundreds of years old. And when you went down into the basement, all we had a little face towel, a very small face towel round our waist, and you go in for a shower. You'd all queue up, dozens of us, and these men would come and look. Some would pull out their penises and do things. But what happened is that you weren't allowed to talk. But then all of a sudden, they would say, over there. So you'd be left there for hours on end, freezing cold, with just this little towel, and you'd be underneath the sink to try and keep warm and try to hide. And then you would hear the keys, and he would come down, and then that was when he would pull out the bell, he'd bend you over and whip you and then rape you. But then the next time, he's got you in his arms.
It's such a psychological manipulation.
Yeah, it's so difficult to see. And again, as you know as well, with the Catholic Church, they are the biggest experts that when you're 16, when you walk out that building to start a new life, they are masters at turning the guilt onto you. It's all your fault.
100%. Yeah, and that's the other thing people don't understand, you know, the grooming that goes into this type of abuse. When it's ritualistic abuse happening over and over and over again, they need the trauma bonds. They need to be the perpetrator, but they also need to be the rescuer, the one that comes and saves you and gives you love. That way you bond to them and you feel comforted and like somebody saved you. But on the other hand, they're the same people harming you. And so it's just this horrible dichotomy, this duality that a child has to cope with. And it's just an impossible thing for them to cope with, you know? And there's no solution. There's nowhere for them to run. There's nowhere for them to hide. They just, you know, they have to go with whatever their abusers want. It is mind control. You know, this is slavery of children, ritual abuse. It's just heinous. And I'm so sorry for everything that you went through. Your story haunts me whenever I hear these bits and pieces, and how, you know, these priests that show up in society and are respected by the people that they sermon to are doing these horrific things and taking groups of children and doing these things to them in the care homes. You know, it's so eye-opening and disgusting and horrific, you know, and that it's still happening today because we're not doing anything about it. So I'm really sorry that you went through all of these things, you and all these other children. It's unspeakable horrors that you faced and that you lived through, you know, and we're really lucky that you're here with us today, Dave, and that we get to hear your story and learn from you, and that you're out there helping so many people. Thank you for everything that you do.
Yeah. And again, it's just so that you can raise awareness, because we all know there is people out there. You know, there's so many stories I could tell you. Again, you've got to marry up with the grooming gangs. 250,000 young girls were sexually abused before anybody even realised it was going on. Really? Are we to believe that? Are we really to believe that? With this historical abuse, everybody knew it was going on. But when you start talking about, when people say, for example, Dave, how come you're the only one that survived? Where's all the other men? Well, look in the newspapers and see that's all there when other men came forward, and then ask yourself, where have they all gone? I don't have the answer, but what I can tell you is they were there. It didn't just happen to me. You know, I've told you the man, and these are to live with. People come forward and say, Dave, I was there. And I said, you've got to go to the police. You need to go to the police. The guy had two daughters and two granddaughters. And he went to the police. He's there for 6 hours, comes back, goes home and hangs himself. I think I told you the story about the Canadian guys. Did I tell you that one? I think I told you the last time, where I received this phone call, and the guy had an American accent. Sorry?
Oh, I said, I think so. Go ahead and retell it if you want.
I'll say it. I'll tell you for your viewers. I got a phone call once, and the guy had an American accent, and he says, "Is that Dave Sharp?" I'm not going to do an American accent, just talk normal, Dave. and he says, "Do you remember me?" He was in St Ninians as well. He said, "I was there with my young brother," and he said, "We used to get out on work patrol. We used to get, and I believe I went as well. You went, kind of a brick factory, 10 hours a day, and this was called work experience, but it wasn't. It was slave labour, and we never made any money, So somebody was making a lot of money, but this guy said that when he came back at night, before he could even have a wash or something to eat, he was taken out the van and put straight into another van with a load of other boys, taken away and gone through satanic ritual abuses in these same places in the coast and then the castles. And he said to me, he said, "I tried to justice, Dave, and I was speaking out." And he said, what happened was, at the age of 18, he was contacted by the Catholic Church, and he was asked to go to a hotel in Edinburgh. And he went to this hotel in Edinburgh, and he sat down with these two men. And again, he didn't tell me if they're priests or their collars with the priests or in suits. But he said that these men said to him, he says, "Listen, we know you've got family in Canada." He said, "So we've got your passports, and you're going to go to Canada." He said, "If you ever step foot in Scotland again, you'll be murdered." So he said to him, right? There's nothing they said to me, "You're going to be murdered." And this was now 40 years later. 40 years later, and this guy says to me, "Dave, my brother died just before Christmas without ever seeing Scotland again. Can you get justice for us?" Carry that of people, and when you think you've got another story and another lead, and then it's just taken away, and that's what happens repeatedly. And again, go back to so many people in prison, so many people disappeared, so many stories about the strange coffins, children put in coffins, dead ones. That I sent you the link. I sent you the story. Do you remember? I sent you the story with the boys buried in between priests. These kind of things, and you're saying, why is nobody bringing this up? Why? I mean, I've said I'm 66 years of age now. I don't know how long I've got, but I need to Scotland more. I hope different things will happen. But what I'm trying to say is, before I die, I will go back up to St Ninians and to the graveyard and visit that young boy. His family's all dead now, so I'm the only one he's got. And he's the young boy who's in between. He's in a grave, coffins, the priest coffins, and you can't think, I can't. What is that? What is that all about? And they've put a 99-year lease. The Catholic Church have put a 99-year lease on that grave, so nobody can touch it. 100 years, and there's a priest and a young 14-year-old boy, and then a priest, Alexander. I didn't know him; he was there before I went there. But stories about how the Christian brothers, when they used to taunt and threaten boys, "If you don't do what we're going to tell you, this is what's going to happen to you." And they used to tell them the stories of this grave. And then when I heard about this, I thought, I've got to find out. And I did all this investigation. And then after a while, I found the family, Cumbernauld, I think it is, near Glasgow. I found the family, and the sister was telling me how they'd been threatened, and they were told all this stuff about he died in a box and stuff that was just so unbelievable, things that couldn't have happened. But this boy's sitting there, and he's left there. It's just you just, again, people say, "Oh, you're morbid, you're too depressing," you know, all this stuff, you know, and we understand people don't like to hear these, what we lived in. This is what we grew up. This is the life we grew up with. You know, it's and yeah, we can have a laugh. We can, you know, I don't, you know, I don't have many friends. That's the truth, you know, and I don't have family. But by God, I'm thankful for what I've got and what I've been through, you know, and I'm thankful that I've got this amazing story to tell. But again, it takes you down a dark path, Emma, of things that we're talking about now that you think, you know, and again, I don't know why I keep, when you know, see like Indiana Jones, you know, and you see some of the real bad things that the Nazis did, and you ask yourself, we're saying this happened in our back garden, you know, this happened in our own back gardens, you know, that's the reality.
Yeah, the things that people do to other humans is just, it's incomprehensible to most people. But the Holocaust is a perfect example of this happening, of groups of people getting together and doing horrible things to other innocent people. And it's the same. Those people still exist in the world that do those things and enjoy it or benefit from it psychopathically, you know, emotionally, and feel powerful because they can abuse little kids and innocence, you know, and take innocence from kids and animals and, you know, things that they perceive as being weaker than them. It's just, it's disgusting, you know, and we are very lucky that we get to be here and listen to you and learn from you, you know, not just from your story, but from the work that you've done, the things that you've done in your community, the awareness that you've brought, the survivors that you've connected with and connected to each other. You know, it's wonderful that we get to learn from you. You're a wealth of knowledge, Dave. And, you know, for people listening, I'd love for them to be able to connect with you. Can you share where you're at on social media and where people can reach out to you, support you, and just, you know, especially if they're survivors, to reach out to you?
Well, I only have Twitter, so it's at Dave Sharp 15, DAVESHARP 59. And when you talk about my YouTube channel, that's something I did an interview with me, and the guy who did that set it up as he did the interviews on YouTube, but I don't go into it. I don't. To be honest with you, I don't know how to put things into it because I know more about one-legged Russian ballet dancers than I do about computers. So I really don't know how to use you. I don't, honestly, seriously. I'm just, I do these spaces and people keep saying, look in the purple pill. And I don't know what that means. I'm honestly, I'm old school. So I've got no understanding about computers, and I do know how to go on YouTube on the television and watch documentaries, but I've gone into mine, but I don't use it, so I don't advertise it. But yeah, I'm on over 10,000 followers on Twitter. That's my main one, and
11,000.
Again, when sorry,
I said you have 11,000 followers. It says 11.
Is it 11 now? Is it? Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is. That's awesome.
That must have gone up since that must have gone up since we spoke. But again, I do tweets. I do tweets that get like sort of 20, 30, sometimes even 500,000. I did one with Sinead O'Connor when she died. I did an eulogy, and that got 700,000 views.
Wow.
I've done I've done my poem on forgiveness has gone 250,000. You know, and sometimes I do the tweet that's my pinned tweet. When I was 16, I visited a doctor. That had over 300,000, and then I made a mistake. I was playing about with it, and I pressed the wrong button, and it disappeared. So I had to do it again and start from scratch. But I don't necessarily. The thing is with Twitter, Emma. The thing with Twitter is I'm not educated, so I'm not trying to be sophisticated or anything like that. But I use it to send a message. I don't use it to provoke anybody. I don't use it to upset anybody. Yes, sometimes I can be a bit provocative, you know. Come on, you people, you need to start listening and that kind of thing. But I don't swear. I don't, and you know, I've been told by a lot of people. A lot of people have said, and I don't have many skills in my life. I've not any education, but I do love writing. I love writing. My book's finished, but as soon as I finished my book, that was when these people made the false allegations. So my book, I can't do my book until I've got to get justice. I can't leave it where it is now. And I've got this. I tell you what, my book's going to be something really special, because what I've done is I've got a book of poems, Bob Dylan songs, and some of them, one or two of them, are in my Twitter, and I've done a lot of Bob Dylan songs and a couple of Beatles songs and turned them into child abuse, and I've got certain periods in my life where the poem's relevant to. So what I've done is I've got the book, and I think there's sort of 15, 18 poems that I'm going to insert into certain sections in the relevant bit. But again, it's all in pieces now because I had these false allegations made against me. So I can't write the last chapter. I can't write the last chapter before was when I'm about to become retired. I'm thinking about, you know, slowing down, but I'm not going to give up the fight and all this. But then, as I say, all of a sudden, just completely out the blue, I've got the police at my door, and I'm been taken away in a car. I've not been in any trouble whatsoever for 30 years, turned my whole life around, an amazing story. And then it was like everybody, it's like I had this gun to my head, and everybody who I thought was there to help us, people like me, these people were all lining up to pull the trigger. The lawyers, the judges, the police, everybody. And the child abuse charity, it's just, and then as I say, when you get into prison, everything I've been talking about for years happened to me. And even the people in prison were saying, we knew, we everything you've said is true, and now you're here to prove it. You're proving everything you said was right, and you're showing the world how Scotland treats people who were in the care system. And this is the point. This is what happened, because I went to a child abuse charity for help. I was a client of these people, for God's sake. How on earth, how on earth can the chief executive of a child abuse charity be so desperate to put one of our own clients into prison? It doesn't make, it's just unreal. It's just so unreal. And as I say, when it gets to court, which it will do eventually, or somebody, we've had like 4 or 5 people. Every time I do one of these spaces, we get like people coming forward saying, I've listened to Dave Sharp and I was with that charity. The same thing happened to me. And I've got some horrendous stories from women who told me their story, and I had to go to another charity in Scotland and say to them, can you please help this woman? Because it's too much for me. I don't know what to do to help her. And this is, and I'm saying to them, can you go to the police and tell the police about this? Because I got put in prison for false allegations. What this woman's telling you now, the same thing happened to me. And I got put in prison, and they say, we know, Dave. But the thing is, everybody's too scared to speak out. Everybody's terrified to speak out, because if you start speaking out, you're funding. There's an example today. One of the charities in Scotland, Women's Aid, Rape Crisis Glasgow, who came out in support of women's rights, all this stuff that's going on in the Scottish Parliament with transgender and all that stuff, which just, it's too out of my league. I can't make sense of it all. But the charity who stood up for them are now being told that their funding's getting stopped. So this is the Scottish government. Again, anybody who speaks out, anybody, you speak out and you're going to get punished. This is the truth. Yes, and the evidence is there on a daily basis.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about your Twitter page is you post updates, you know, so people can obviously listen to your interviews and hear a big picture of the work that you've done, the causes that you stand for, and of course your testimony. but you post a lot of articles, you post a lot of content on your X page of these cases that are happening in your country and beyond. You post about the grooming gangs, you post things about your own story, other survivor stories, you know, so I really encourage people to go follow you there if you're on X. And again, that is at Dave Sharp 59. That's his handle. And I'm going to have that in the show notes. And Dave, I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done. And, you know, I'm really grateful that you came on today to talk again. You know, it's great to be able to talk about solutions too. We know the problems exist, so of course we have to talk about that. But more importantly, we really need to talk about these solutions and what we can do about it. And I know very few people that have done more to provide solutions than you. So we have a lot to learn from you on that. So, you know, of course, if anybody listening, if you want to start an event in your town, if you have questions about it, if you want advice, Dave is a great resource to reach out and ask how to help organize that, or some tips that he can give you. We need more of what he's doing in the UK to not only grow, but to expand. We need this to happen in other countries and other cities and other states and other countries. And, you know, Dave's a great person to lean on if you're somebody that's looking to start events or start rallies and start, you know, making some noise where you're at about this and bringing awareness. So Dave, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and for sharing. And I hope that you'll come on again. I hope that your book, and I pray that your book gets finished, because I know that it'll be an incredible testimony to put out there in the world. And, you know, anything that's, you know, new happening in your life, or any new events, or whenever your book does come out, you're always welcome to come back on again. We love getting to connect with you and getting to learn from you. Just thank you with all my heart for everything that you've done for others. You know, I can't wait till the world steps up and does the same for you and gives you the same that you've given to other people.
Thank you very much. If I can just to encourage you, if you can, if you've got the time, try and reach out to these other survivors in Britain who have gone through satanic ritual abuses, and ask them, give them my details, ask them to connect with me, see if we can get some sort of connection going together. Yeah, I do learn a lot listening to you. And again, this is the beauty of speaking out. When you talk about your stories, it's when you express and speak and relate and all the rest of it. It is. I'm not blowing my own trumpet. I'm not doing that, but it is kind of brave, and it is difficult for people to do what I do. As I say, when I talk about the guy who called me out the blue, and I was able to guide him through what he's actually experiencing, and it is a process, but we learn all the time. We do learn all the time, and I'll go to bed at night and I'll pick up on things that I've spoke about, and things will happen. You know, it always does, because that's the journey we're on, and that's why it's so important that we do rely. I'm willing to talk to anyone if we can do what it takes to stop and make sure nothing happens to our children, that no child goes through what we went through. So God bless and thank you, everybody.
And with that, you guys, I'll have Dave's information in the show notes. I'll have my information in the show notes. Send Dave your prayers. Go connect with him. Lift him up on Twitter /X, whatever you guys want to call it. I still call it Twitter sometimes, but please go connect with him. I'm going to have his link in the show notes. Go support him, lift him up, share his posts, especially if he's shadow banned. We need all the help that we can get to get survivor stories elevated. And we just can't thank you guys enough for all your support, for all your love, for all your compassion for survivors, and for everything that you guys do on your end to care about these stories and to share them and to learn from them and to sit through them, as hard as it is and as dark as it can be, to realize that the light on the other side of the tunnel is knowing that this is happening, so we can shine a light on the darkness instead of letting the world be the darkness that it is. So you guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.